The story began in a sunny place, brightly lit and beautiful, where a guy in a wonderful suit stood in the center, looking slightly preoccupied in front of him. A girl stood in front of him, whom he boldly asked if something had happened, and if she was nervous, smiling faintly. She stood in front of him in a wedding dress, holding a lush bouquet of roses in her hands with an uncertain lowered gaze, as if with excitement and fear. She hesitantly asked if there was anything wrong with him choosing her, without raising her eyes, crushing the flowers in her hands. Smiling, the guy extended his hand to her, lifting her chin towards him, saying that he swears to protect her. Looking tenderly into her eyes, he asked her to be happy, calling her Agnes, asking if she promised to be like that with him. Looking into his eyes at the same time, the girl clearly felt better, so with a smile on her face, she said the guy's cherished yes. Extending her hand to him, already smiling brightly, Agnes mentally told herself that she was no longer empty. Their hands almost touched as she mentally hoped that they would be happy together with him. The next moment, due to the push, Agnes dropped the plate, which crashed noisily on the floor. The girl looked at the fragments in horror, cursing herself for breaking, while the other maids looked on angrily and giggled. Immediately, one kicked her, saying that she crashed because she was clumsy. While she was calling her a fool, the head maid came from behind the noise, asking what all this fuss was about. Agnes, who had fallen on the floor, cried quietly while the girls said that they were not to blame, and it was all her. The woman believed the other maids without question, starting to yell at the girl about why she was ruining everything again, and how much she could repeat while Agnes, crying, collected the pieces. Looking up briefly, the head maid stood in front of her, watching her work with anger and hatred. Amid the whispers and condemnations of the other maids, Agnes trembled awkwardly and wanted to justify herself, trying to find the words. However, the woman clearly did not want to listen to her, shouting and ordering her to stop doing this and go away, pointing to the exit. She bowed, obediently agreed, lowered her eyes and, under the gaze of the maid, walked away. Under the condemnation that she was lucky only because the gentleman picked her up, Agnes, having already taken her skirt, ran down the corridor, thinking about her own thoughts. She was mentally empty, having lost all her memories as a child. Walking wherever she looked and being on the verge of death, the girl was picked up by Count Wilfred, the owner of the mansion where she now lived and worked. Another worker caught her in the corridor, handing her a broom and then asking her to help clean up the garden. Looking out the window, she said that it was cool there today, asking mockingly that she still didn't feel the cold. After a moment of silence, Agnes humbly said that it was so, lowering her head. Starting her work and leaving, the girl only heard ridicule and discussion from other maids about how they called her some kind of doll or ghost. Having listened and lost herself in her thoughts, Agnes did not at all follow the road in front of her, lowering her head and looking at her feet. Around the bend was walking a noble person, whom the girl, without noticing, accidentally pushed, crashing into herself, only hearing the laughter of others. Raising her head, Agnes guiltily recognized her as her mistress, who was clearly angry at this attitude towards herself. Instantly falling to her knees and burying her face in the floor, the girl loudly apologized to Lady Carla, sincerely regretting, even though in her mind she knew that she would beat her again. Walking closer to the maid, the mistress raised her face with her shoes, rudely asking if she really thought that she would receive forgiveness if she bowed before her. With a sharp wave of her leg, she called her impudent and a doll with no memory, believing that she had completely forgotten about good manners towards her mistress. The blow brought blood to Agnes's cheek, but she listened peacefully to the girl's humiliation, even to the way she put her foot on her, not even daring to cry. Still looking arrogantly, the lady called her a dirty rat, and her mere presence nearby was enough to dirty the mansion. The maid only mentally prayed for this to end as soon as possible, while the mistress came up with an idea, grabbing a bucket of water. With a sudden movement, she said that she could wash her, throwing water from a bucket onto Agnes. Carla asked if it seemed to the girl that she had become a little cleaner, and if she agreed with her about this. Agnes, mentally asking for this to end as soon as possible, only quietly thanked the lady, agreeing with her that she was cleaner now. She angrily noticed that the maid did not even know how to cry, calling her disgusting, noting out loud that only her father would allow her to throw her out. She only listened to these insults while the lady left, mentally thanking her for finally leaving. Even in this state, Agnes had to go outside and clean the courtyard of the building, blushing from the cold. The remaining water was dripping off her, the cold wind only further hindering her work and adding more coldness to her body. Mentally, she told herself that she felt both cold and pain. She just couldn't show it, in gratitude to the master, that he slept with her and gave her work in this mansion, even if it was dirty. And she didn't care that this place looked like hell because of the people that were in the building. The other maids watched the street from the windows, noticing that it would be cold tonight due to the snowstorm. In a small room, Agnes was lying on the floor in a blanket, as another girl reported to the head maid about her strange behavior. She remembered that she was cleaning the garden and was thoroughly wet and frozen, while the woman just called her a fool on business, telling her to leave her in the room so that no one would get sick. Even though she heard that the maid said that she didn't care what happened to her, the girl was only worried about the cold. Always whispering in her mind that she was in pain, she only asked out loud for help once, when pain began to constrict her throat, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, Agnes began to emit some bright light that lightened her hair whiter and her eyes red. She seemed to look at herself and mentally understood that this light reminded her of the past, when she tried to ask for help. Feeling like she was in formaldehyde while floating, she wanted to know when it was. The next moment, Agnes saw before her eyes a picture of fire, where two bodies lay on the floor of the palace, covered in fire and blood. The little girl looked at this with complete horror in her eyes, loudly and sickly calling for her parents. Those two corpses were reflected in her eyes, still continuing to call for their parents, who seemed to be those dead people. The girl, with tears in her eyes, did not let up, already running up to her parents on the floor. While the fire was spreading further along the walls and floor, the little one ran up to her mother, asking her to wake up. Only the girl only opened her eyes, seeing how the girl was crying loudly and calling for help from at least someone. The girl, with all her remaining strength, reached out to Agnes with her hand, asking her not to cry, calling her her dear child. Under the falling beams, the girl asked the girl to simply live and be sure to find her happiness. Gently hugging her shoulders, wiping her cheeks from tears, she asked her to live for them, her parents. As soon as the light came through the window, Agnes woke up, reluctantly getting up. She tried to remember what it had just been, thinking it was a dream, but now it was morning, and she overslept. Then she realized that she felt better, touching her forehead and making sure that her temperature had even subsided. Only after looking into the nearby mirror did Agnes awkwardly realize that her eyes were red, just like in her dream recently. The girl had just stepped out into the corridor when the maids were discussing the carriage visible in the window, having learned that it was the Duke's. They were inspired to understand that it was a messenger who had arrived, not believing that Lady Carla would be proposed to, but they were still happy if everything turned out well. Listening to them, Agnes was mentally happy that she was already feeling better, noticing that yesterday's scar on her cheek from her mistress's blows had disappeared in the morning. Only in her mind did she remember that dream, wanting to finally understand why she had dreamed it. Carla herself saw the messenger's carriage, just as happily thinking that most likely they would propose marriage to her, waving her fan smugly. She was already imagining this marriage, mentally asking who her future husband would be. Waving her fan in front of her face, because she was all burning with curiosity, the lady walked along the corridor, not knowing where to take herself. Immediately on the corridor, she met Agnes, who was tidying it up, when she immediately had an idea. Carla needed to pass the time, and until she found out about her future wife, she decided to make fun of her. Approaching closer to the girl, the lady said, not without mockery, that she was safe, which slightly frightened the maid. Looking at her from above, Carla explained that she had heard that she had a fever and almost died. Instantly bowing before her, Agnes mentally understood that she would be hurt again, when suddenly the mistress said that she had business with her. Carla's parents communicated with the messenger, accepting with horror and shock the proposal they heard from the Duke for their daughter. The lady herself at that moment threw Agnes into a dark abandoned room, kicking her with a satisfied smile. Having said that it would be ugly if such a dirty rat as that one showed up to her guests, therefore her task would be to stay here for some time. As soon as Carla said this, the door to the room instantly closed, leaving Agnes in confusion and misunderstanding. Having propped the door and bolted it, shaking off her hands, the lady could not get enough of her action, happily noticing that she had killed time well. Happily, Carla returned to the palace with the thought that she would now go talk to her parents about a future engagement. Agnes desperately knocked on the door, asking her to open it, but without suffering for long, she quickly calmed down. She quickly realized that her mistress had left, sitting on the stairs in sadness and simply waiting to see what would happen next. At the same time, Lady Carla was already entering her parents' office, beaming with joy and calling out to them. Only they were clearly not so happy, but her mother, standing at the window and watching the messenger's carriage, called out to her daughter with a worried look. The girl seemed to ignore the darkness that hung in the room, directly asking if the messenger had really come for her marriage proposal, to which the father only sighed with concern. After a while, the man finally decided to explain and tell, immediately saying that she was right, because they brought a letter from the Duke, who asked for the hand and heart of the daughter of the Wilfred family. Carla did not hide her joy at such an offer, mentally rejoicing that everything was as she thought. Without listening to the end, she immediately asked if she was now the Duke's wife, while her mother tried to calm her daughter's overwhelming joy. The father had already risen from his seat, explaining that Duke Gilbert Dedrix, a powerful man in the Eastern Kingdom, was asking for marriage. Then Carla realized with horror which Duke wanted her hand in marriage, because he's also the most mysterious Duke who rarely appeared in high society. It was especially known that countless girls married him, and every single one died a mysterious death within a couple of months after the wedding. It was for this feature that he was nicknamed the Deadly Duke, as if he was sending letters from fate. Carla immediately screamed that she didn't want such a fate, that she didn't want to die like that, asking why she was doing this and what she had done so bad. Mom was already trying to reassure her daughter, turning to her husband that she had only recently turned 18, maintaining silence for a while. Hugging her, she turned to the girl's father, noticing that even if she had done something wrong somewhere, it was too cruel to give her in marriage to such a duke. The man himself agreed with this, lowering his head and guiltily realizing that if he refused, then, according to rumors, both the bride and her family would all be killed. The woman continued to console her daughter, realizing how terrible everything was and how cruel the person who sent them the proposal was. Raising her tear-stained eyes to her father, Carla asked if he was really going to sacrifice her for the sake of their family. Approaching her, rubbing her eyes, the man asked her not to cry because Dad already had a plan ready. Then the door suddenly opened and a man called out to Agnes, who was sitting, saying that her master wanted to see her. The head maid led the maid into the office itself, not quite happily saying that she had brought her here. Only the appearance of the girl outraged Carla, forcing her to angrily ask what she, a dirty maid, forgot here. The man calmly said that now Agnes would be the bride of Duke Dedrix, believing that she fully deserved it, while the girl herself stood in a stupor. His family also didn't understand why the lady still asked, crying, what it meant. Her surprise and shock were supported by her mother, who asked her husband if she would really pretend to be Carla. The gentleman calmly approached the girl, explaining that the maid's real name was Agnes Wilfred, his brother's only daughter. These words echoed in the girl, while the man continued that she, the daughter of Wilfred, would be the bride of Duke Dedrix. In addition to Agnes, the noble family was also surprised by this fact, looking at her with surprise and some misunderstanding. At this point, Carla, having recovered from her surprise, screamed and asked if the blood of the Wilfred family really flowed in the girl's veins. Her mother was also surprised, not understanding what was happening and not believing that she had a niece. Touching the maid's shoulders, the man loudly announced that she was now his daughter, which only puzzled her more. He quickly said that after the death of his younger brother as an elder, he took the girl to him as his adopted daughter. Due to circumstances, he treated Agnes like a servant, which caused his wife to misunderstand, causing her to ask why this was so. Having said that he would talk about this a little later, the man pointed his palm at the door, saying that he wanted to talk to the girl alone about everything. Carla was greatly offended by her father's request, which is why she started screaming at him in a rage. Only the man glanced sideways at his daughter, forcing her to remain silent with his gaze, voicing in a rude voice that he told them to leave. Pointing to the door, which the headmaid had already opened, sharply saying that he hated it when his family disobeyed him. Mom had already gently taken the girl by the shoulder, leading her to the exit, while she was already looking displeasedly in the direction of Agnes. Her face instantly squinted in hatred, telling the maid that she would never, ever call her a sister. When the master's family left, Agnes felt strange with so much hatred from the lady. As soon as they left, the man immediately began to apologize for presenting such information to the girl like that. Inviting them to talk, Agnes at that moment hovered, standing with her eyes downcast, kneading her palms. Her owner also noticed this, but remained silent, smiling and waiting to see what the girl would decide. She recalled that he picked her up 7 years ago, and from then to this day she has been a maid in his family. The man immediately agreed with everything that this was true, only he did everything to protect her from problems. Agnes, of course, was puzzled by this, immediately asking what kind of protection he meant. Then he began to explain that his brother and his wife, that is, her parents, were killed by someone unknown. The maid asked in horror whether they had really killed her, remembering a recent dream, realizing that it seemed like her memories. If he behaved differently with the girl, her parents' killers would hunt her. So this was the reason for the man to behave this way with Agnes. After asking again, she was very dumbfounded that having made her a servant, he hid her from the killer. And having lost her memory, she cannot remember who she was. The man immediately agreed with her words, looking at her smugly and arrogantly. Approaching her, he told her that it was time for her to return to her true past self while straightening her hair. He immediately said that she would marry the murderous Duke instead of Carla, because only she could play this role. Agnes imagined this marriage with the Duke with horror, realizing that she had already fallen into a grave trap. She had heard about this man through rumors with other maids who recalled that any daughter of a nobleman who became his bride would meet a quick death. Agnes asked with fear that if she married instead of her mistress, she would meet her death that way. Patting her on the head, the man called her a contented, smart doll, which made him incredibly happy. Approaching the maid's face, he sharply noticed that even useless things sometimes come in handy, like her. He said that as a daughter of Wilfred's family, she would have to be proud of herself and go after her parents. The owner's gaze and his words greatly frightened and stressed Agnes. But she clearly had no opportunity to argue. Only a voice from behind the door said that all preparations were completed. The man sent the maid to go and prepare for the wedding. Outside the door stood a crowd of maids, their heads bowed before them, ready to work. The man only quickly said that Agnes must look worthy for the Duke's family, demanding that they do this. The girls peacefully obeyed him, saying that they would do as he wished, soon washing the girl completely in the bathroom. Agnes was slightly uncomfortable with this, saying that she could have washed herself. The head maid only rudely replied that they could not do anything, turning to her as my lady, explaining that this was the master's order. While she was relaxed, the woman grabbed her by the shoulders, hanging on top of her, which frightened her. She strictly told her not to interfere with their work because she was required to be just a doll until the very end. Agnes understood that she had been bathed, combed, and made up like a toy doll, where she would still have to wear a beautiful dress. Looking in the mirror, she suddenly heard from the head maid that dolls could be beautiful, as well as the fact that in this house, no one would call her a servant anymore. It was soon announced that the carriage had arrived for her, to which a terrifying cry of forgiveness came from behind her. Although all the maids bowed before her, the girl felt cold from their wishes for a good journey to her. Before leaving, Lady Carla also met her, clearly in a bad mood, which made Agnes feel uncomfortable. The lady herself said that even though she had changed on the outside, she was just as disgusting on the inside, hoping that she would be killed quickly. Carla also keenly noticed how the doll was useful to her, because it would die in her place. Having demanded that the previous servant express her gratitude, she never expected the girl to bow to her while simply leaving. At the exit to the carriage, its owner himself was waiting for her, and he noticed how she began to look more beautiful, especially noticing that the Duke would be pleased with such a beautiful and young lady, while Agnes looked at the exit with fear. On the street stood a carriage with a coachman who had come to pick it up, which only caused greater horror. The man pushing the girl brightly said that, as promised, the daughter of the Wilfred family would marry the Duke. The butler only extended his hand to help the girl enter, asking for her hand. Mentally realizing that she would never return to this mansion again, no matter the reason, she was still grateful to the master for his care, promising to be a doll until the very end. Before she could take the conductor's hand, Agnes turned to the man, which surprised him and caused awkwardness in the guy. She bowed low to him, saying goodbye and calling him her father. He didn't quite understand her gesture, only silently watching her as she got into the carriage. Very soon the carriage moved off, and the owner imaginary stood in his place, following with his eyes. Mentally, Agnes admitted to herself that even though she was an empty doll, she could feel emotions. Now heading towards the Duke, she openly felt fear, expecting her death. In the palace, the butler told his master Gilbert that the bride would arrive tomorrow. He also said that he heard that she was the daughter of Count Wilfred, while the guy said irritably that everything was repeating itself again. He didn't understand why they hated him so much, because it doesn't matter who comes, any of his brides dies. Looking at the moon during the trip, Agnes was also aware of her imminent death, but did not resist in any way. In a bright clearing in the sunlight, a boy and a girl were playing, catching flowers and enjoying playing with each other. The boy was collecting flowers in a bouquet, suddenly turning to her, asking if she really couldn't leave. The girl awkwardly admitted that she had the same strength as her mother, weaving a beautiful wreath from flowers. He gave her flowers while the girl said that until she could use power, she was forbidden to be near people. For this reason, she is always in the mansion with her mom and dad and the maids. Only, the girl admitted that she was very bored being at home, despite all the attention around her. That's why the boy asked if she really wanted to go somewhere far from home, while his face was not visible because of the bright sun. Looking up at the sky, she dreamily said that she really wanted to travel because she had read about it in books. Remembering, the girl said that many beautiful and wonderful things were written there in other cities. She really wanted to see mountains, lakes, and different landscapes, like in the pictures, because she liked it all. Slightly embarrassed but excited, the boy said that he would go with her because he himself was interested. Only the girl remembered one thing, because her mother always told her that it was very scary on the streets in cities. The boy immediately said confidently that he promised to protect the girl, no matter the cost. Awkwardly asking him if it was true, the boy knelt down, which embarrassed her. Holding out his little finger to her, the boy said that this would be a promise, repeating again that he would protect her. Seeing the girl's surprise, he explained that he would do this for the sake of her smile next to him. Continuing to confidently hold his hand and little finger, the boy suggested that they stay together forever. Slightly embarrassed, the girl was still incredibly happy to hear such words, looking at her friend. Soon she extended her hand, taking the boy's finger with her little finger, confidently saying that she completely agreed. Waking up, Agnes again awkwardly realized that it was just a dream, but such a good one. The butler rode next to her in the carriage, not too gently announcing that they were almost there, causing the girl to twitch. She instantly looked out the window, enjoying the beauty of the scenery that was visible. Only her mood immediately changed, remembering what they told her about the murderous Duke, almost forgetting that she was going to her death. The change in face was also noticed by the guy sitting next to him, immediately asking if something was bothering the lady. Looking at him awkwardly and remaining silent for a minute, Agnes decided to ask what kind of person Duke Dedrix was. The butler did not hide it, saying that he was a wonderful but terrifying gentleman who showed almost no emotions. Saying that to protect his possessions, he does not hesitate to use various dirty methods and will mercilessly kill anyone who dares to harm him. The final phrase that the Duke is simply a terrible person only added horror to Agnes's eyes, realizing that all the rumors and her thoughts about him were confirmed. She was especially frightened by the obvious death, like the other ladies who came to him as brides. The girl was immediately informed that they had arrived, which brought her little happiness. While they were introducing Daedrix's estate to her, she looked at this dark palace with horror. Agnes was genuinely strained by the situation, but there was no turning back, which is why she was escorted from the carriage to the door. She was met at the entrance by another butler and maids, where the man said that they were looking forward to seeing her, lady. Having conveyed that the gentleman was waiting for her in the living room, she and the butlers headed there, without showing her emotions in any way. However, there was some experience, but also the attitude towards her, like bowing, was surprising and alarming. Approaching the door, the elderly butler informed his master that Lady Wilfred had arrived, opening the doors. When they entered, the Duke was looking out the window, from where the sun was shining faintly, leaving his gloomy figure in the shadows. At the sight of the guy, Agnes only became more frightened, not believing that this man would now end her life. Bowing deeply to him, she reintroduced herself anyway, mentally aware of where she was. Sir Dedrix approached her, asking her to raise her head, because although he forced her to marry him, he himself did not intend to marry. Therefore, for her own good, he suggested that the girl return home, which already strained her more, realizing that there was her home. She immediately remembered Carla with constant insults and humiliations, a sideways glance from her owner that he would be disappointed to see her return, and just condemnation of everyone who served on the estate. They would clearly drive her away even from work. Agnes immediately remembered when she was locked in the barn, through her thoughts hearing the Duke calling her. He rudely repeated for her to return, while the girl's fantasy added to his words a house that was hell, not believing that she was useless even for the murderous Duke. Agnes immediately said that she did not want to go back, explaining that she had already left Wilfred's family, and she had no place to return to. Kneeling down in front of him, she said that if he didn't need her, then let him just kill her here and now. Here the Duke, with some pity, asked if she had really come here to die. Closing her eyes, the girl quietly said that this was so, awaiting her fate. Sir Dedrix examined her with his eyes, keenly paying attention to her rough hands that begged. She was surprised by the guy's words that he didn't like killing people, dumbfounded and not understanding how. The Duke continued that if she had nowhere to go, he would figure out how to help her, now offering to stay in his mansion. Agnes just raised her head at him, with eyes of complete shock, not realizing that she was being told such a thing. Sir Dedrix, with eyes of complete sympathy, only asked if she agreed to this. Looking at him from below, the girl again quietly said yes, already looking at him with a tender gaze. The Duke walked around the lady, calling for Klaus to take care of their guest, leaving her bewildered by what was happening. Looking out the window in front of her, the sun illuminated the living room brighter in an instant, while the girl still did not understand that she would remain alive. In his office, Gilbert was indignant at Klaus that he had already told him that he was not going to get married. Only the man continued that the gentleman needed to do this as soon as possible. Leaning on his chair, the guy reminded that he would live the way he wanted, and besides, he was more interested in protecting his territories and interests, immediately remembering Agnes. He remembered her rough hands, immediately asking Klaus if she was the only daughter of the Wilfred family. Having said that, if he suspected something, he just had to order, and he would immediately contact the bride's family, as the Duke asked to wait a little, thinking to himself. He also remembered the girl's words that he should kill her here and now, having already decided what order to give. He demanded to know more information about Agnes Wilfred, to which the butler bowed and immediately went to fulfill it. Sir Dedrix himself mentally asked Count Wilfred if he really decided to deceive him. Standing in her lounge, Agnes admired the picture in the window, still floating in her thoughts. She immediately remembered Carla again, who spoke about honor for the empty doll, believing that she was mistaken. The girl looked out the window at the falling leaves, realizing that such a role was clearly not for her. While sorting out the papers, suddenly someone knocked on the Duke's door with excitement and noise until he slowly allowed him to enter. Slightly irritated, Gilbert asked what happened and what the urgency was. Klaus and the maids were alarmed to report that Lady Agnes had disappeared from the estate. Putting the papers aside, the Duke himself asked in amazement how this was possible, while the butler explained that he had already ordered the maids to find the girl. Sir Dedrix was clearly worried, immediately remembering the lady's eyes when she asked to kill her here and now. Mentally, he realized that these were precisely the eyes of someone who was ready to die. Slightly irritated, Agnes was outside, having found a broom and clearing the paths from the leaves that continued to fall on her. The Duke quietly approached her from behind, directly asking what she was doing here, causing the girl to twitch in surprise. Agnes awkwardly looked back at him, explaining that the windows from her room looked out here, and seeing how many leaves there were, she decided to clean up the street. Although he did not give such instructions, it was entirely her initiative. Awkwardly lowering her eyes, closing his eyes as if in irritation, Gilbert said that this was the work of servants, asking if she had come here as a servant. Realizing how stupid she had behaved, she silently looked at him in fear while the guy continued to demand an answer. Having bowed to him, Agnes began to ask for forgiveness, because she should have asked his permission first. Looking around, he even praised in surprise that, nevertheless, she cleaned up a lot on the street alone. Therefore, he asked permission to thank her, which only made Agnes more embarrassed, awkwardly realizing that they wanted to thank her. Suddenly, a strong wind blew sharply, causing the girl to tremble slightly from its gusts. Her hands clutching the broom, she was mentally aware of the cold outside, thinking that she would get sick again. At that very moment, the Duke's cape was already placed on her shoulders with his own hands, protecting her from the cold. Sir Dedrix said that dinner would be ready soon, inviting them to return to the mansion. She was greatly surprised by such kindness, and she was especially pleased by the warmth of the cape. Soon they were already at the dinner, sitting opposite each other, eating dinner. Only Agnes had difficulties with this, not knowing etiquette at all. She could not understand what equipment she should use now. Mentally, she was uncomfortably aware that she didn't know how to use it, having only used a spoon until now, sighing. Then the Duke noticed her confusion. saying that she needed to respect the rules of etiquette, scaring the girl more. However, Gilbert immediately added that they were the only ones here alone, so she shouldn't worry about it and eat as she wished. Still, this calmed the girl a little, but she still didn't immediately decide to eat. Clumsily cutting herself a piece, Agnes awkwardly brought a piece of meat, tasting the dinner. The guy watched her reaction, immediately asking if she really didn't like it. Putting down the cutlery, the girl herself tried to realize what she had just eaten. Beaming with pleasure, she directly said that she had never eaten anything more delicious. Sir Dedrick smiled at her happiness, saying that he was pleased to hear this and was sure to convey her words to the cook. This made Agnes eat more confidently and enjoy her food with pleasure. The Duke also became infected with this happiness, smiling as he continued his dinner, drinking from a glass of wine. Having finished dinner, the girl awkwardly called Mr. Dedrick's, wanting to ask a question. Looking at him, Agnes awkwardly asked whether she would be killed here or not. The Duke began to get a little annoyed by this, directly noting that she was not learning anything, but also asking if she really wanted to die so badly. Then the girl honestly admitted that she was sent to him only for this reason. With displeasure, Gilbert asked if this was about the rumor that the murderous Duke was killing his brides. He immediately explained that if she left him, she would certainly die, which slightly surprised her. The guy did not explain, only saying that for this reason he was not going to get married, but Agnes had nowhere to go. The girl awkwardly said that it was, looking at him confidently while he added that she was only here at his request. That is why he will find himself a new bride, which only surprised her more, not understanding why this was so. Having made up his mind, Sir Dedrick explained that he always sent brides home only if the bride came home again, saying that she had been rejected. Then everyone would immediately begin to humiliate her. Indeed, in this case, unpleasant rumors would have spread even from the working women, and in this way the Duke came up with a legend that he kills all his wives. Only now the guy wanted her, Agnes, to find someone whom she really wanted to marry for love. The girl only awkwardly repeated the last words, although she did not understand half of them due to the fact that she was a maid. The Duke explained that the nobility have such a thing as arranged marriage, and if they find out that the bride is alive, they will give her to someone else, which is why brides usually chose some travelers or traders as their husbands. Together, they went to distant countries and lived so freely, when even some such couples still live together. He added that this was much better than them returning home, remaining happy. Calling out to him, Agnes awkwardly began to say that everyone considered him a very frightening person, even recalling the opinion at the Wilfrid family estate. Only when she met him in person did she realize that everything about him was just a rumor, remembering the warmth that he did for her on the street. Having confessed, Agnes sincerely thanked him, because for the first time in her life, someone had courted her. Saying that Mr. Dedrick was very kind, the guy was surprised and shocked by these words. He suddenly stood up, to which the frightened girl began to apologize if she had said something wrong, because she did not at all want to offend him. Walking around the table, the Duke said that she was his guest, and neither he nor his servants would ever harm her. Advising her to rest now, the guy walked away while Agnes smiled awkwardly after him. In his office, Gilbert, reading a book, was still mentally thinking about the Count's daughter Wilfrid, because apparently they treated her very coldly. Moreover, no one was definitely involved in her upbringing, since the girl did not even know how to use the dishes, raising more and more questions for the guy. Later in time, he was walking along the corridor, suddenly hearing crying from Agnes's room. Knocking on the door, not daring to enter just like that, he was only more stressed by the silence and crying, wanting to know what happened there. Having asked for forgiveness, the Duke went into the room, where he saw that the girl was sleeping in bed under the light of the moon. Only the crying did not subside, which is why Gilbert came closer with concern, wanting to find out and look. After asking if she was okay, Agnes lay there and cried, asking someone for help in her sleep. She quietly called for her mother, which only worried the guy more as he came closer to her. The girl again dreamed of that nightmare with her parents, heartrendingly calling for them as a little girl. That dream was gone, and now she was weakly kicking her feet, walking forward, absolutely tired. On the way, Count Wilfrid met her, holding out his hand and saying something to the little one. He took her as a servant while other voices around her were judging her, that she was devoid of emotions, that she was like a doll and didn't feel pain, where everyone wanted to hit her to test it. Gilbert immediately began to wake up the girl, calling her name and asking if everything was okay, which is why she woke up, seeing his face in front of her. He put his hand on her, gently stroking her and explaining that he entered the room without permission, for which he immediately apologized. But he heard crying, which is why he entered. Rising, the girl did not immediately understand what it was and did not believe that there was crying until a tear fell on her hand. Awkwardly touching her cheek with her fingers, she only became more convinced that these were her tears, admitting that she was crying. The guy immediately asked with concern whether Agnes was having a nightmare. After a slight silence, she admitted that these were memories from childhood and she was only an observer in them. Sighing, Sir Dedrix realized uncomfortably, saying that it looked like she had been through a lot. Only Agnes, more calmly, sitting up on the bed, admitted that she didn't know at all whether this was true because she had lost her memories. Having lit a candle, the Duke poured water into a glass, while the girl, wrapped in a blanket, watched what he was doing. Gilbert immediately held water in front of her face, for which she thanked her and took the water into her hands. Sipping awkwardly from his glass, the guy asked if she could tell her more about her loss of memories. Agnes clearly felt trust in him, saying that this happened 8 years ago. Then the gentleman, immediately correcting that it was her father, picked her up. Only before she didn't remember anything at all, to which the Duke asked whether she had been adopted. Although this was true, the girl immediately added that she had the blood of the Wilfred family flowing in her, having learned about this only yesterday. Gilbert looked at her silently, thinking about what he had just heard. Concernedly holding the glass in her hands, Agnes understood that she had to tell the truth before, because she still couldn't deceive the Duke, not even knowing etiquette. Through the silence, she admitted to him that she had worked as a maid in the Wilfred family for 8 years. Lowering her eyes, the girl worriedly thought that the guy would probably be angry with her, because no one would like the fact that the maid would become the Duke's bride. Only Sir Dedrix did not say anything about this, only noting that Agnes's life was not very clear, because he surprised her. Sitting down in front of her, he asked if it was hard for her to work since childhood, which only surprised her more. Agnes awkwardly admitted that she didn't know, because she was weak in expressing and feeling emotions due to memory loss, like an empty doll. Such words already hooked the Duke, wanting to know what and why this was so. The girl said that she was a creepy doll with no emotions, because everyone told her so. Only now she herself also thought so, which already surprised Gilbert, who looked at her in surprise. Agnes only continued that she was finally able to be useful to the Wilfred family, who sent her to the murderous Duke. At this point, the guy realized why she was so calmly ready to accept her death, rubbing her forehead. She said that the master ordered her to behave like a doll until the very end. Only the Duke said in a sharp, loud voice that he had had enough, looking at Agnes. The girl instantly fell silent, while Gilbert extended his hand to her and put it on her shoulder, calming her. Looking into her eyes, he clearly said that she was not a doll at all, because she was standing on the street and shivering from the cold, and now she had a nightmare and was crying. While her eyes filled with happiness, the guy continued that she, like any other person, can feel compassion and emotions. Concluding, he added that Agnes was simply alone all this time, looking tenderly. Such kind words truly meant a lot to the girl, making her feel better while some sparks appeared around her. After a while, Agnes awkwardly asked if this meant she was alive, to which she received a quick yes. That's why Gilbert conveyed that he would not allow her to die, promising that she would live on. Having asked if she had anything that she would like to do, the girl thought slightly, closing her eyes. Soon, Agnes said that she wanted to find out everything about herself by remembering the maid's past. Rising, the Duke calmly said that he would certainly be able to help the girl with this. Smiling softly, she tenderly thanked him for everything sparkling with happiness. In the morning, the maid was already decorating her, saying that it suited the girl very well, embarrassing her in front of the mirror. Agnes immediately thanked Mealing, to which she said that the lady should call her on you and do not hesitate to ask her for help. While waiting for breakfast with Agnes, Gilbert read the papers that the butler brought him, studying them. Soon the girl came with her escort, wishing her good morning and immediately apologizing for last night. Handing the papers back to Klaus, the Duke also conveyed the kindness to the girl, noting that it was he who broke into her room yesterday, clarifying why she was apologizing. Putting her hand to her face, Agnes awkwardly realized the truth, again quietly apologizing for the confusion. Trying to divert the topic, she then awkwardly thanked the Duke for talking to her, settling down at the table. Then Gilbert told the girl that she was very beautiful, making her slightly embarrassed. Only then did the Duke notice that she had no knowledge of the life and behavior of the nobles, even if we consider her as a bride, because it would not be easy for her. Agnes felt some pressure from this, mentally not understanding what she should do then. The guy continued that she had absolutely no memories of her childhood, and this could be a problem if you looked at her. The girl completely sank from such comments. Although she knew about them, she was still worried. Gilbert awkwardly explained that he wasn't yelling at her, why she needed to relax, otherwise it looked like he was scolding her. He soon added that he simply expressed dry facts about her, looking straight into her eyes, thinking. After a while, he asked her to respond, asking if she would like to live here, which made the girl's eyes shine. Gilbert said that she would learn everything until she found a good husband, and he would definitely help her get all her memories back while he lived here. Confused by this proposal, Agnes awkwardly said that if he didn't mind, then she would like to stay here. This made the guy happy too, because now they were able to decide what to do, telling her and welcome. Closer to the day, Klaus read aloud a book that Ubel Wilfrid lost his brother and his wife 8 years ago. At the same time, he found and adopted little Lady Agnes. So the girl was a purebred representative of the family line, while Gilbert asked if there was a description of the parents and the cause of their death. The butler replied that there was no information in official documents, which is why the question arose as to who was hiding the information. Closing the book, Klaus asked if the Duke really liked the lady, to which the guy replied slightly irritably that he still did not intend to marry. After all, he swore that he would marry only the one, even if his search for her would take him his whole life. Going off topic, Gilbert asked what happened to the teacher for Agnes, if the butler had found anyone. Then the man made a proposal, immediately asking what about the daughter of Viscount Fuchs, reminding that they also owed something to the Duke, to which the guy agreed, asking him to send them a letter. At the estate of Viscount Fuchs, the girl was already reading the delivered letter, saying that the time had finally come. She considered all the brides of the murderous Duke to be fakes, because she would be the real bride. Another day, Gilbert was already introducing Mia Fuchs to Agnes, explaining that she would now be her teacher. Mia said tenderly that she was very glad to meet Lady Wilfrid. Taking Agnes's hands, the girl said that she already knew what she had to go through, so she would make every effort to make her become a real lady. She was already looking forward to the opportunity to work with her, while the lady quietly squeezed the same, slightly hesitantly. Holding the girl's palms, Mia said that she was a real beauty, while the Duke was clearly pleased with their relationship. The girl only continued that they, as peers, would definitely be able to get along, while Gilbert, leaving, told her not to overdo it with her studies, counting on Mia. Having let go of Agnes's hands, she looked back at the guy with admiration, conveying that everything would be done in the best possible way. At the door, the Duke looked back and said that they would see each other later, saying this to Agnes. Smiling slightly, the girl happily conveyed that it was good while she was waiting. As soon as the door closed, Mia's face changed, inviting the girl to begin their classes. Agnes was sitting at the table while Mia, holding a book in her hands, said that first of all they needed to understand her level, so they would do small tests. The lady did not resist, lowering her eyes and assenting. The girl explained that she would read a poem from this book, and Agnes's task would be to write it on a sheet of paper. Having said that this method is widely used for teaching writing, and it brought back memories from her childhood, the girl immediately felt uneasy. In her mind, she wondered if Mia knew exactly what she was going through as she came closer, causing Agnes to apologize. She conveyed, slightly pressuringly, that you can't talk in class without permission, and besides, they're starting. While the lady began to consider what she would do for work, Mia giggled maliciously, because she knew that she would not be able to write a word, because she had absolutely no education, having also lost her memory and working as a servant. She remembered a recent conversation with Gilbert, who said that there was no point in training Agnes in this way. She understood that Gil wanted to find a good wife, but she saw her as a rival, not understanding what was so special about her. Looking askance at Agnes, she wanted to quickly show how untalented she was, so that she would be thrown out of the mansion. Agnes herself awkwardly did not understand what to do, because she had never read a single book or held a pen in her hand. Having realized how to hold it, suddenly the girl returned some old pleasant sensations. Pulling her hair behind her back, Mia said that they were starting by reading lines from the book, that on that day, I heard how the world changed. Having whispered these words to herself, Agnes suddenly felt and remembered something from the past, long ago. The girl in front of her suggested reading a book today about a wonderful story about a princess and a prince who fell in love with each other. She quickly wrote on a piece of paper, remembering that she also wanted to meet the same prince, and that now the book that Mia was reading was the same story from the girl's dream. In those dreams, the girl was reading a book with the baby, holding her on her lap and reading together. After kissing the top of the girl's head, she said that she really hoped that the girl would one day find her wonderful prince. Smugly, out of the corner of her eye, Mia thought that the girl could not write, continuing to read. Having read to a certain point, he invited Agnes to pause, offering to see what she had done, which she was clearly slightly embarrassed about. Taking a piece of paper from the table where the girl was writing, she mentally thought whether she had written anything correctly at all. Only after taking the piece of paper did Mia see that she could write. Even her handwriting was very beautiful. Checking for errors, she was angry that Agnes, even in a text in which adults could make mistakes, did not make a single mistake. The lady also observed her emotions from the side, immediately apologizing to her in advance. Mia immediately smiled, saying that everything was fine, especially since she was the daughter of the Wilfred family, and it would be stupid to think that she could not write. Having examined her hands, Agnes herself did not believe that she could write, realizing that she simply knew that poem. The thought again came to her that the girl with what seemed like her daughter had read that book in her dreams. Putting her hands to her chest and closing her eyes, the lady understood that something had appeared unexpectedly, but as if it had always been with her. Only Mia immediately threw a stack of books on the table, conveying that then they would increase the difficulty, because in order to become a beautiful lady, she needed to study hard, especially etiquette and art. After all this is an obligatory component of any nobleman, and she will not give concessions because the girl has lost her memory. Looking threateningly, immediately smiling, Mia said that she should do everything quickly and find herself a wonderful husband because she would not want Mr. Gilbert to worry about her. Agnes, filled with determination, said that she would try very hard for this. Working hard on her books, Mia sat on another chair, frankly bored in these classes. However, as soon as there was a knock on the door, she jumped up smiling, thinking that it was Gil who had come. It was indeed the Duke, asking the girls how they were doing with their studies. Confused, Mia immediately said that everything was fine because Lady Agnes had excellent basic knowledge, that in a little time she would learn everything. Gilbert was surprised by this, wanting to see what the girl was doing, taking the paper where she had recently written. He asked Agnes if she didn't think this was surprising, also noting that her problem was gradually being solved. Mia stood to the side, looking at their relationship, clearly slightly askance. The guy continued that perhaps before Agnes lost her memory, she had some knowledge that even though she doesn't remember, it still sits in the depths of her head. The girl herself was glad of this, although she was surprised, but also believing that his theory was true. Only the Duke noticed that it was only the first day, and they still had plenty of time, so she didn't need to learn everything at once. Thanking him, Agnes asked Gilbert not to worry about her, explaining that she still wants to learn as soon as possible. The guy smiled softly at her, clearly pleased with her desire. Biting her lip and with some envy, Mia watched and listened to their conversation, getting more angry. She hated to see Gil being so kind to Lady Agnes. However, watching the girl's behavior, it seemed to her that she was crazy impudent, since she was trying to apologize for everything, as if not understanding her situation. Then Mia decided gloomily that he had made the girl understand her situation. Only her thoughts were instantly distracted by the Duke, calling her to him while she happily flew to the net. The guy began to smoothly lean towards her to whisper only to her, but the girl thought differently, already embarrassed. She stared at him with eyes of complete love, waiting for that very first step towards her. Only Gilbert said that he was not too biased towards Agnes, although he understood that she was trying to do better by training her as quickly as possible. Leaning closer to Mia's ear, he asked to be gentle with the girl, warning that if he saw the task too difficult for her, then the girl would have to blame herself. The girl's eyes immediately filled with horror, afraid to imagine what could await her. Gilbert did not explain anything, leaving Mia in misunderstanding as she turned to leave. Agnes sat slightly overwhelmed by her studies until the guy called out to her as he walked past the table. At the exit, he looked at the girl, wishing them a speedy meeting for dinner, smiling slightly. From this, Agnes rose from her seat, following Gilbert with her gaze and smiling lightly herself. As soon as the door closed, the girls were left alone and alone with each other, where dead silence hung over them. Sensing an unpleasant aura of mood from the girl, Agnes awkwardly called, approaching and wanting to know what it was. However, Mia made a sharp turn and pushed the girl with force and some hatred. Because of this fall, a chair fell on the floor while the lady fell on the fifth point of her body. Clenching her hands into fists, Mia noted with gloating that she had overdone it, smiling deceitfully. The girl looked at her friend with bewilderment and fear while she asked permission to ask something. Mia directly asked if she was really going to take Gil away from her, saying that he already had a bride, something that he had been looking for a long time. Noticing that Agnes did not understand who she was talking about, the girl explained that the guy promised his bride when he was little, that he would take her as his wife. Looking at the girl's still surprised face, Mia asked if it was possible that she had no idea who it was. Then, already smiling, making eyes, and feeling shy, she said that it was her and she would be his bride. Gil just didn't remember her, thinking about it fondly while Agnes was still surprised. Looking threateningly, she conveyed that if she thinks that she can take him away from her, she is very mistaken. Hanging over Agnes with her shadow falling over her, Mia demanded that she stop acting like she didn't understand anything and walk away from her future husband. The next day, the maid enjoyed decorating and straightening the girl's attire. It was only then that the bruises on the lady's arms caught her attention, asking where she got them from. Having looked at her hand herself, Agnes only awkwardly covered it with the sleeve of her dress, saying that this was a fall. The sleeves were too short, which is why she covered Mei Ling's bruise with her palm, saying that it didn't hurt her, so everything was fine. Mentally, she admitted to herself that it was Mia because she was punishing her. After all, the girl was not at all embarrassed to hit Agnes with a pointer on her, somewhere on the shoulder, somewhere on the arm. The maid immediately suggested that it might be Lady Mia, looking worried. Moreover, she remembered how she forbade them to even approach that room in order to concentrate on their lessons. She remembered the state Agnes was in after her first lesson with Mia, saying that she was very worried about her. Changing the girl's clothes to hide the bruises, she said that if something like that happened, she would be obliged to report to her master. Sighing, closing her eyes, Agnes asked Mei Ling not to report or say anything to the Duke about the bruises because she just fell. Moreover, adding that she did not want the maid to have problems because of her later, to which she wanted to say otherwise. Agnes interrupted the girl, saying that Mia was important to the Duke. From such words, Mei Ling was only more in a stupor, mentally not understanding what the lady was talking about. She looked at the time, telling the maid that classes would begin very soon. With her head down, the girl opened the door for the lady, ushering her out of the room to go to class. She immediately called out to Mei Ling, conveying with a bright smile that she was incredibly grateful to her for everything. This made the girl blush, feeling the warmth from the lady's words that slightly turned her head. Agnes walked down the corridor alone, mentally realizing that this was much better than the Wilfred family home. She especially remembered the Duke's words that she was not a doll, which is why she herself began to consider herself not as empty as before, walking confidently. Entering the office, Agnes immediately greeted Mia, who was waiting there, wishing her good morning. She stood quietly with her hands folded, saying that she was looking forward to them starting classes. The lady and Mia wished good morning with a smile, noticing how positive she was. Approaching her with a pointer, the girl said that when she is so serious about studying, she begins to glow with happiness. Just grabbing Agnes by the hand, she lifted her sleeve, saying that she couldn't believe that she kept silent about the beatings, asking if she was really trying to seem like a pretty girl to everyone. Squeezing her hand until it hurt, Mia asked if the girl understood that there was no point in her silence. Holding Agnes's hand, the girl asked if it hurt her, deliberately making it more painful, offering to change her mind and leave the mansion right now. Only the lady, enduring the pain, said that she would never leave, slightly gaining confidence. Raising her head and turning to Mia, she asked why she wanted to kick her out so badly. Surprised, the girl let go of Agnes's hand, saying that her statements were too serious. She's just trying to show her that she doesn't belong here. The more she amazed the lady. With folded hands, she innocently said that the girl was supposed to marry a stranger and die by his hand. Mia pressed that now her family would never see her again, noting how unfortunate it was. Making tender eyes, she offered to return home before it was too late, as if asking. Agnes understood where this was all going, explaining that at least she spoke so convincingly when touching the book. The girl continued that she did not have a home where she could return, which already shocked Mia. She was clearly unhappy with this fact, irritably heading into another room, saying that nothing could be done then. Opening the door, she pointed to the piano, saying that then today they would learn to play it. Mia immediately gave the girl the notes, inviting her to try to play it, standing arrogantly next to her. Agnes, looking at the notes, understood that this was her first game. Although she knew how to read notes, she would hardly have been able to play. Having decided to make an attempt, Mia immediately hit her hands with a pointer, saying that she had pressed wrong. She was threatening and demanded that the girl continue playing without stopping. Then Agnes hesitantly continued to play more carefully, fearing a blow. Only she couldn't do much right away, again receiving a pointer on her hands, hearing Mia's proposal to start all over again. For every mistake, the girl received a blow, eventually receiving 0 points, which is why Mia slyly noticed that she was starting to worry about her since she couldn't cope. Moving on to another subject, the girl placed problems in front of Agnes and asked her to solve them. The girl read them carefully, mentally realizing that she had studied for so long, so she could solve this. Only when she tried to take the pen, nothing worked, because her fingers hurt very much and were not able to hold it. Having reported that the time was up, Mia arrogantly noted that the girl had not solved a single problem, calling her a stupidity. Rudely, and adding that in this case she would never become a true lady, making Agnes feel more depressed. Turning her back to her, Mia asked why Gil was so worried about the girl. Here, she already asked Agnes if she really seduced him, because the servants are devoid of pride. The more she only put pressure on her. Mia awkwardly admitted that Gil was not so preoccupied as to climb the first skirt he came across, already adding that the girl was rather boring. Agnes was slightly taken aback by what she had just called her, as if not believing what she heard, saying the last word in her head. Calling Mia over, the lady asked if she could ask her something, which she clearly did not expect. Having made up her mind, Agnes decisively asked if she really was the Duke's fiancée, looking at her. Mia clearly did not expect such a question, looking at the girl outrageously, asking what she was talking about. Agnes began to think that from the Duke's point of view, she was just another unwanted bride for him, but he listened to her carefully and was always ready to help. She added that the girl also noticed this, directly asking why, if she was his fiancée, he didn't treat her like that. Mia was in horror, realizing how right she was, not knowing what to answer right away, looking askance from above. Having become gloomy, the girl began to figure out why this was so, quietly saying that this was all, remaining silent. Turning away from Agnes, the girl began to look for an excuse that this was because of a promise made in childhood, because most likely Gil had simply forgotten her face. Immediately, the lady asked Mia if she still believed in childhood promises that the Duke might not even remember, which caused horror on her face. With a sharp turn, she slapped Agnes in the face with all her hatred, not knowing how else to express her anger. However, Mia came across an inkwell, which she threw with all her hatred into the lady's face, telling her to shut up. The girl's eyes filled with tears, screaming that Agnes knew nothing about her at all, clenching her fists. The lady was slightly writhing in pain, because after the blow, a wound appeared on her forehead, bleeding. Trying to get up, she listened to Mia screaming that Gil would be hers, even if he did not remember that he had promised her to be his bride. Pressing her hand to her chest, she asked if Agnes knew how long she had been waiting to meet the Duke, because he still did not notice her. Her eyes glowed with hatred, adding that instead of being with the guy now, she was teaching some kind of incompetence on his orders. Agnes had already managed to sit down when the girl called her stupid, which offended her, demanding that she stop. Mia pretended not to hear, still angrily asking what she was saying. Her hair began to lighten, and her eyes turned red as the girl told her to stop insulting the Duke. Only the girl looked at her with horror, awkwardly whispering with fear that she was a monster. Agnes said that she didn't care what the girl's opinion of her was, as long as her wound began to sparkle and disappear. Mia looked at her face, noticing that the wound had completely healed, leaving only pooled blood. Only Agnes just rose from the floor, repeating that she should not insult the Duke. Taken aback from the girl, Mia shouted and told her not to come near her, calling her a monster for her magic. She ran away, screaming for help while Agnes glared at her, saying that she would not care who she complained to, because she was sure that the Duke would listen to her anyway. She added that then the guy would know how Mia treated her, causing her to freeze in place at the door. Agnes's words that she was not going to tolerate this were the last straw, and she said that class was over for today, took her dress and ran out of the office. She remained standing in the office, thinking that if the girl told the truth, then the Duke simply doesn't remember anything, asking herself whether it was in vain that she threatened her then. Immediately her attention was attracted by the reflection in the mirror, which was her own, slightly surprising. Agnes herself noticed that dried blood remained on her cheek, but the wound on her forehead had disappeared, surprising her with the appearance that the girl had seen. Towards evening, she looked out the window, distracted from the book that was lying on the table. She remembered the last time she saw her red eyes, realizing that this time even her hair had changed, wanting to understand what was happening to her. The Duke had already entered the office, saying that her teacher had gone home early today. Agnes did not hide her joy that Gilbert came here to her. Coming closer to the girl, he said that if she doesn't get along with Mia, she just has to tell her and he will find her a new teacher. Hesitating temporarily, Agnes raised her head to the guy, conveying that this was not necessary, everything was fine, and still thanked him for his concern. She understood that she was no longer a doll, telling Gilbert that she and Mia had a good relationship, mentally wanting to figure everything out herself. Only the Duke remained silent at first, as if slightly wary, but said that let her do as she knows. Having examined the girl, Gilbert said with a smile that she had changed a lot in such a short time. Agnes was incredibly pleased with such a compliment, smiling back, slightly shy. Looking out the window, the guy suggested that she go horseback riding tomorrow in order to diffuse the situation altogether. Returning his gaze to the girl, he added that she should not worry, because he would show her how to ride a horse. Only she awkwardly and quietly repeated about the horses, looking slightly blankly at the Duke. She remembered a not very good memory of them, where she was already a maid on the street, cleaning up leaves. Carla immediately called her to come over to her for a second, looking slightly slyly in her direction. Agnes immediately looked back at the voice, seeing the lady behind her, listening to the task. The girl pointed to the book that she dropped when she got out of the carriage, demanding to pick it up. To speed up the maid, she added that if she didn't hurry, the horses would trample her, and the book was very valuable. Everyone present watched with sly faces as Agnes reached for the book to get it from under the horse. The girl herself was frightening. She slowly sat down on the sidewalk, holding out her hand for a book. Before she even had time to touch something, the horse suddenly screamed loudly, starting to make noise. Agnes only had time to look down at this horse, realizing with horror that it would move her hoof. The next day, she and Mia stood on the street, opposite the meeting place with the horses. Although she did not outwardly show her anxiety, Agnes mentally admitted to herself that the horses scared her, just the thought that today she and the Duke were taking the fear away. Only Mia looked at her askance, mentally understanding that she was a real monster, not understanding how she could even be calm after yesterday. Soon the Duke approached the girls, apologizing for keeping them waiting, addressing only Agnes. He also immediately noticed her excitement, asking if something was wrong, and looking askance at Mia. Saying no, she wrung her hands while the lady interrupted Agnes, calling for Mr. Gill. Embarrassed that he paid attention to her, she said that she seemed to be afraid of horses. The guy had already glanced at Agnes, asking if it was true, slightly worried. The girl looked at the Duke while Mia cunningly thought out her plan that she would now take the opportunity to talk to Gill like this. After all, she mixed the horses with a stimulant in their feed, so very soon they should go crazy as soon as she mounts the horse, luring the Duke. And a woman who does not know how to ride will fall under the hooves of an angry horse. Mia so wanted to save Sir Gill from this monster Agnes, so that when he learned the truth, he would immediately get rid of it. The girl awkwardly lowered her head, saying that once a long time ago she was forced to pick up something from under a horse and she hid it. Closing his eyes and exhaling, the Duke noted that she was very lucky to survive then. Wanting to reassure, he explained that horses should not be approached from behind, because then the horse would sense danger and reflexively try to defend itself, and then the horse obviously did not hit on purpose. Looking awkwardly at the guy, she replied that she knew that the horse was not to blame for anything, awkwardly wanting to continue, but remained silent. Then the Duke asked if they would go for a ride today, looking tenderly at Agnes. Gilbert leaned closer to her and changed his phrase to say that he would do everything in his power so that she would stop being afraid of horses, which sounded calmer to the girl. Noticing that Agnes was feeling better, the guy introduced her to his horse, considering it a friend named Zig. Approaching his muzzle to her, he invited her to touch him, because he was not dangerous, which the girl did not immediately dare to do. Noticing her excitement, Gilbert gently put his arm around her shoulders, softly whispering for her to calm down. After all, if she is worried, then Zig will feel it too, and will also begin pointing at the horse's face that he is not going to attack her at all. Looking at him, Agnes began to calm down more, trying to gather her strength. She slowly extended her hand, already touching his muzzle, communicating that she was really looking forward to the opportunity to work with Zig today. The guy noticed with a smile that the horse liked the girl, conveying that his friend liked her. Feeling the reciprocity of their friendship, Agnes had already leaned down and touched the horse's face with her face, whispering that he was very cute. Mia immediately reminded of herself from behind, admiring how beautiful the horse was in front of them. Pushing the girl, she said that she also wanted to say hello to her, which surprised everyone. A moment later, Zig suddenly lifted his head, starting to act a little frantically. Although the guy was holding the reins, the horse only began to kick, which surprised him in the behavior of his four-legged friend. Immediately, other mad horses ran out of the stables, which even the employees could not restrain. While everyone began to panic, Mia realized with a sly smile that what she had planned had begun. The Duke immediately told the girls to quickly go to the mansion, while he himself went to hold the horses. While Agnes stood in shock, the girl understood that anyone who did not have time to escape would immediately become an easy target for the enraged horse, wanting to push it so that it would definitely die here. Only she reacted quickly, and before Mia could touch her, she ran to the Duke, calling out to him from the danger. The guy himself saw that a mad horse was running towards him at full speed, awkwardly realizing his dangerous position. The girl who created this problem saw this danger as Gil screamed in concern. He froze in horror, expecting an animal attack because there was nothing to be done. As soon as he jumped on him, Agnes flew up, pushing the guy away from danger, taking on this role herself. She stood confidently under the dangerous hoof to protect the Duke, who constantly cared for her. Danger was imminent, and after being hit, she instantly fell to the ground under Gilbert's frightened gaze. Realizing what she had done, the guy instantly screamed her name with some anger. While the horse calmed down slightly from the attack, the men began to drive it back to the stable. The Duke grabbed the girl's body, taking her into his arms, worriedly examining her wound. Mia started screaming to attract the guy's attention to her because she was scared. That's the only way the butlers came to her, trying to calm her down, because otherwise the horse might go crazy again, while she openly ignored them, shouting to Gil that she was scared. The guy didn't even move when she called him several times, taking care of Agnes's condition with the butlers. There was a look of fear on his face as he put a bandage on the girl's face to stop the bleeding. The butlers grabbed her, leading her into the palace as she continued to scream the Duke's name that she too had suffered. Saying that she scared her terribly, she was already looking after the departing guy who was urgently carrying Agnes in his arms to the palace. Looking at this, she didn't understand why this was so if that girl was a complete monster. Gilbert did not hear anything, looking worriedly at Agnes, carrying her away in his arms. In the palace, she did not wake up while the maids took care of her, washed her, and changed her into more comfortable clothes. There was also a doctor nearby supervising the girl's work so that everything was done smoothly for treatment. The Duke stood outside the door, waiting for permission to enter and speaking with the butler, learning that no one else was hurt and the horses had already calmed down. He also reported that the trainer had found evidence that something like a stimulant had been added to the food. The guy assumed that this was an attempt on his life, ordering the investigation to continue. Standing in the office, he looked out the window, thinking about Agnes, trying to understand her. He angrily did not understand why she protected him, still remembering her face covered in blood. Only then did his gaze soften, because when they first met, the girl was ready to die, which greatly amused him then. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Mia, who asked if that girl was really so important to him. What is even more important than his own bride, which is why Gilbert turned around, asking what she was talking about. Placing her hands on her chest, the girl asked what about their promise that they made to each other in childhood. The Duke frankly did not understand what she was talking about, which is why his look changed to a more rude one. Mia came closer to him, suggesting that if he couldn't remember, then she would be happy to help him. The girl touched his face with her hand, saying that she was the bride he was looking for so hard. Mia remembered how they used to meet each other as little children. Only their entire relationship was exchanging glances without words. Only a few times did the Duke turn to look at her, meeting her for the first time. Only Mia assured that they made a promise to each other about their engagement. The guy listened to this story with some disgust, narrowing his gaze. Sharply pushing her palm away from his face, Gilbert reminded her that yes, they had actually met when they were children. Only this happened simply because they were sitting together at the table where adults were communicating. Having clarified whether he was wrong, he asked if she really considered this a promise of engagement. Mia continued to convince that the guy simply didn't remember because it was a very long time ago. At that time, she was the only pretty girl around him, and so he wanted to get engaged to her, beaming with joy at his idea. Only the Duke's face only became more gloomy, saying that this was some kind of nonsense. The girl was clearly not ready for such words, looking sideways at the guy with a deceitful smile. Gilbert continued that his bride had distinctive features that cannot be forgotten when looking at and examining her. Soon, and coming to the conclusion that it was definitely not her, Mia Fuchs, as if wounding her with words, horrifying her. However, the Duke did not pay attention to this, continuing that his bride is special to him, and he is not very pleased when he is confused with someone else. He asked the girl to apologize for this misunderstanding, only Mia attacked him, grabbing him and screaming in his face that she loved him. With eyes of complete despair and madness, she said that even today she protected him from Agnes, because she is a monster who needs to be gotten rid of. Here, Gilbert already guessed something, looking at the lady in surprise, realizing what she said. Pushing her away from him, grabbing her by the shoulders, the Duke shouted and asked if it was she who added something and mixed it with the horses. Looking at the guy's withering gaze, she stammered and admitted that she only did it for his own sake. Realizing what had happened, the guy let Mia go, saying that he had chosen her as a teacher. Looking sideways at her, it seemed to him that next to someone of the same age, Agnes would have a good incentive to study. Mia listened to the guy in fear and from his gaze, feeling the sweat running down her face with tears. Immediately, he realized that he was very mistaken in his choice, putting the girl in danger next to Mia. Only now did he understand that he should have kicked her out of here much earlier, before the lady began to think that she was the daughter of an aristocrat, with good manners, clearly better than some servant. She considered herself much more important than the worthless monsters, referring to Agnes, believing that Gil was simply disgraced because his horse went crazy. And he thought about her, because Mia thought it was because she was special, already looking back at the guy, asking what was going on. He called the butlers, pointing to the girl, saying that she was a criminal who had encroached on his life, ordering her to be seized. Only Mia, with fear, did not give up, screaming that no one should touch her, because she is the real Lady Dedrix. Falling to the floor, since she was not stronger than the butlers, the girl begged Gil to listen to her, promising not to go that far. However, even vows did not make the Duke relent, looking down on her while she was grabbed. Crying, Mia asked him to stay with her, because he could not resist her charm, because she believed that she was the one for him. The guy interrupted her words, asking if she really believed that he would fall in love with her if she was just nearby. The Duke's sharp gaze made Mia fall silent, looking down at him stuttering. Standing opposite her, he said that he respected Agnes, who risked herself to protect him, but she just ran away from responsibility, which made Mia tremble from such rude words for her. Gilbert only added that his answer would be clear in her beliefs. Lying on the floor while she was held, the girl, choking in tears, stuttered, unable to say anything. The Duke reacted coldly to this, warning that if she caught his eye again, he would take her life, like a true Duke of Death. Such words clearly struck horror in Mia's eyes, only Gilbert continued that she once called Agnes a monster, holding a pause. Later, he continued that here she looked most like a monster, which shook the girl more, causing her to tremble and roar. The words that she was a monster here completely knocked her out, which is why, hitting the floor, she lost at least some strength to resist or convince. Gilbert met with the nurses and doctor in the hallway, knowing that Agnes was already recovering and should wake up soon. The girl really looked better and more relaxed, but she continued to sleep. The guy sat next to her with his head bowed, looking at her tenderly, wanting her to get better soon. His attention was also attracted by the bandage, which had loosened slightly, with the palm of his hand straightening his hair a little to look at the fabric. He wondered aloud if the girl would mind if he rewound it, filming it with tenderness and care. Adding that he wanted Agnes to wake up as soon as possible, he looked at her forehead with shock. Smoothing it, Gilbert could not believe that there was no wound at all, as if it had disappeared from her face. Immediately, memories came to him of how a little girl with white hair said, holding his hand, that everything was fine and she would definitely help him. His little face was covered in abrasions and scratches. He only mentally admired it, noticing how sparklingly beautiful the girl was. Looking at Agnes, it made him dumbfounded, for a moment thinking that she was that same girl. The memory continued as the girl softly kissed the guy's hand, holding it in her palms. Lying down, the boy himself watched this while his abrasions and wounds softly and quickly disappeared from his face. The girl continued that she would definitely help him, gently squeezing his hand, sitting next to him and beaming. And now in front of the guy's face was a girl with similar instant healing magic. Rising from her bed, Gilbert rested his hands on her bed, not believing himself that this could be true. Very soon, Agnes also woke up, trying to realize where she was, immediately remembering what had happened. It seemed to her that most likely the horse had kicked her, but here she was out of the way, gently touching the bandage on her face. Gilbert continued to sit next to the girl, already saying that he was very glad that she woke up before she had time to figure it out. Looking at him, she immediately realized that the Duke had been sitting next to her while she was passed out. Only the guy's face darkened in an instant, saying that he needed to say something, causing a little horror. Agnes herself felt a slight excitement, staring at him, afraid to find out something terrible. Gilbert began to blame that jumping in front of an angry horse is tantamount to suicide, wanting to know why the girl did it. Awkwardly lowering her head, she said that her body somehow twitched, and she thought that the Duke might have been hurt. The guy, slightly smugly, said that he was able to protect himself, looking away. Agnes then explained that if he had been hurt, everyone in the mansion, as well as Mia, would have been very sad. Gilbert was immediately hooked, including Mia, whom the girl highlighted very strongly on the list. Under the guy's sharp gaze, she stuttered a little and conveyed that she was very important to him. The guy seemed to immediately guess that the names were referring to Agnes, explaining that she was not his fiancée. Because of this, the girl was in some shock and stupor, looking at him and not understanding how this happened. Gilbert explained that Mia had made it all up, and he had not given her such a promise, clutching his forehead in displeasure. Agnes felt awkward, mentally understood that she had thought so, only the girl's words sounded very convincing. The Duke's mood immediately changed, saying that because of her selfish beliefs, Mia committed a crime. Looking at Agnes's frightened eyes, he promised that this would not happen again, as if knowing that the girl understood him. Kneeling down on one knee before her, Gilbert said that he was looking for his lost bride. It was true. Only with a sidelong glance, he confidently added that this was definitely not Mia, pronouncing her name clearly with hatred. Looking down, the girl felt even more uncomfortable, apologizing to the Duke. Only he instantly interrupted her, saying that it was he who should apologize, because it was he who appointed Mia as her teacher. Bowing before Agnes, the guy, placing his hand on his chest, conveyed that he was very sorry for putting her in danger. This caused the girl to go into some panic, explaining that everything was fine, waving her hands and worrying. He went up to her, gently touching her cheek, saying that he wanted the girl to take more care of herself, sincerely saying that he was horrified when he saw how she was bleeding. With a softening gaze, the guy stroked a lock of Agnes's hair. He asked her to imagine that someone important to her would suffer, asking if she would be sad about this, while the girl began to remember. Some people came to mind, faces that the girl could not remember but considered important to her memory. Next was Mylin, who warmly greeted Lady Agnes even in her thoughts. The Duke was also important to her when he promised at night that he would not allow her to die so that she could live on. Noticing that Gilbert was right, she was incredibly glad that he was safe, while he himself said that he was completely fine, thanks to her, because he was very worried. Agnes smiled awkwardly and said that he shouldn't have been so worried about her, saying that if it was a wound, it would probably heal quickly. The guy was hooked that it would heal quickly, too quickly for such damage. I was wondering if this was possible, immediately remembering my past. Thoughtful, he asked Agnes to keep it a secret that he was recovering so quickly, making her surprised at such a request. Immediately, looking more rudely and seriously, they asked her to promise him, to be sure. Looking at him, the girl's eyes began to remember something, widening in some surprise. The blonde girl also asked to keep something a secret, putting her finger to her lips like little children. Slightly frozen, Agnes told the Duke that she understood everything, promising to remain silent. Then the guy suggested that in return, he would also promise her something to make it fair. Kneeling in front of her, Gilbert promised from now on to erase all the sparks that would fall on her. After a while, Agnes, calmly recovered, sat at the table before her breakfast. Smiling, beaming with happiness, said that she was incredibly glad that she recovered in just a few days. Holding a cup in her hands, Agnes apologized for making the girl worry about herself. Only the maid, beaming more with joy, said that the main thing was that the lady was alive and well, moving. Glancing briefly at the window, Mei-ling told the girl that there was something outside, which is why she looked there while drinking her drink. Gilbert stood below her window, holding his friend Zig in the reins and waiting for the girl. When she came down to them, the guy explained that he thought it would be terrible if she hated horses. He immediately invited the girl to greet the horse, which is why she did not refuse, squeezing Zig's muzzle with all her might. Telling him that she was extremely glad to see him again, Gilbert noted with a grin that he was needlessly worried about hatred. Immediately, with a sharp jump, he climbed onto his friend under Agnes's surprised face. However, having settled down and holding the reins tightly, the guy extended his free hand to the girl, inviting her to climb. Agnes looked at him slightly embarrassed. Only admiration sparkled in her eyes, extending her palm. Gilbert slightly sharply, but gently pulled her towards him, arranging her on the horse, holding her tightly. He leaned towards her ear, conveying that everything would be fine and he would always be there. She had nothing to worry about. The Duke also said in advance that now they would move slowly, which happened while they were walking slowly. Noticing how calm Agnes became, he asked if she was scared, hearing a slightly quiet no. Having already grabbed the reins with both hands, the guy suggested speeding up slightly, which slightly surprised her, causing her to tense up. Slightly accelerating Zig, the horse jumped up to gain more speed, slightly frightening Agnes. At such a gallop, they quickly galloped off into the forest, where autumn leaves were falling from the trees. The strong wind from the horse's running blew Agnes's hair, also forcing her to close her eyes so that nothing would get into them. The horse gradually began to slow down, smoothly stopping near the bright flowers under its hooves. Immediately, the Duke leaned closer to Agnes, whispering that they had already arrived, inviting her to open her eyes, which the girl obediently did slowly. Her surprise knew no bounds, looking at these bright flowers with sparkling eyes, which was what Gilbert did once, watching the pleasant surprise of the lady. A beautiful landscape of mountains and various flowers opened before them, the petals of which were carried by the recent wind. As soon as she got off her horse into the clearing, Agnes ran to the flowers with her arms open, not hiding her sincere happiness from what was happening. The guy watched her, saying that he really wanted to show her this place, as if he was smiling slightly. The girl, beaming with a smile, thanked him, conveying that the place here was very beautiful. Gilbert awkwardly began to smile himself, conveying that he was very glad that she liked everything. They were already sitting together in a meadow of flowers, where Agnes was already stroking Sieg more boldly, enjoying nature. Here, the Duke thought a little, voicing that he was now thinking about a new mentor for the girl. The horse rested its muzzle on the lady's shoulder while she listened carefully to the guy, trying not to be distracted. Gilbert continued that the next teacher would definitely be on her side, so that he would be well aware of the features of his mansion, and, in a sense, flexible. Only Agnes had strange thoughts about the fact that she would have a new teacher. She imagined these activities again with another person in order to be a true lady, realizing that she would have to do more. After all, only through her studies can she become a worthy bride for some important duke. She sighed with slight sadness, conveying that she would be glad to have any mentor the guy would give her. Leaning on his hands, Gilbert remarked with a smile that since it didn't matter, he would become her teacher. Agnes was a little embarrassed by this proposal, staring at the guy, realizing what he had just said. He didn't quite understand the girl's reaction, asking if she really didn't want him to be her teacher, as if frowning. She immediately confidently answered no, that she was very glad, slightly surprising and already embarrassing the Duke with her confidence. She herself realized this, that she was too confident in the village, shouting, blushing more from this. Having come to her senses, Agnes quickly thanked him because she was really happy about it. Gilbert also smiled tenderly at the way the girl smiled and was happy, softly saying, "Please." While Sieg was eating, they walked a little closer to the water where Agnes awkwardly called the Duke. Slightly hesitantly, she said that she was very happy here, looking into the water. She is incredibly grateful to everyone for their kindness to her, although she was slightly wary, making the guy a little tense. Sitting down near the water, looking at her reflection, she honestly asked whether it was possible to be so generous. Gilbert immediately said that she deserves to be happy, and they all want her to smile. Immediately, she looked back at him, again calling him Duke, wanting to ask something. Only the guy interrupted her, asking her to better call him Gilbert because he is a little uncomfortable when people address him by his status. Smiling softly at him, Agnes awkwardly thanked him, now calling him Mr. Gilbert. At Wilfred's estate, the butler conveyed to his master that Agnes was supposed to die when she married the Duke of Death. Only she was still alive. Smiling slyly, the man noticed that everything was going according to the plan he had. The butler asked, slightly surprised, whether the gentleman was really not surprised at all, watching him walk towards him. A portrait of a blonde-haired girl with scarlet eyes peeked out from behind the curtain as the man continued that he had been waiting for 10 years. But something had never awakened. Therefore, the marriage proposal from the murderous Duke came just in time for him. That's why he sent Agnes to him, mentally telling her to enjoy this calm while she could. They continued to sit in the field, where Gilbert, looking at the flowers, said that this blue flower is called Erin. Looking around, he awkwardly admitted that he was not sure about other colors, especially red, noticing that they were similar to purple. Agnes already looked towards those flowers, saying that these flowers are called sepiars and are red and purple. She felt happy, beaming and looking at the guy while the petals surrounded her. Gilbert was interested in the girl's knowledge, saying that she knew a lot, asking if she had read it in the encyclopedia. Immediately, Agnes's mood changed, answering that no, she had not read it. Already mentally asking herself how she knew this, a child's voice whispered next to her, as if telling her to remember. Plunging into some kind of darkness, the same little girl from her dreams stood in front of the girl's face. The little girl looked back at Agnes, clenching her hands into fists. Taking the girl's hand, she immediately pulled her, asking her to go with her, leading her into some darkness from the clearing. Gradually, the blackness around Agnes began to turn red, turning into fire, causing her to tense up slightly. In front of her, she saw the same dream, where 2 people were lying on the floor in a fire, dying. In one hand, she held the girl that she constantly saw. With the other, she clenched her fist, looking at the dying woman. Breaking the silence, she said that she absolutely remembers this dream. Only the girl immediately interrupted her and said that this was not just a dream, but her full-fledged memories. Her gaze hardened, looking at Agnes and demanding that she remember as her exact copy came out of her, running into the fire towards the people. She sat down next to the girl, screaming heart-rendingly, calling her mother, trying to somehow pull and lift her. Sitting next to them, she screamed from the fire for someone to come and help, to save her parents. The mother's hand immediately stretched out to the baby, rising and holding her palm, whispering so that she would not cry. The girl's tears stopped briefly as she focused on her mother, asking what happened. The girl quickly began to tell that one man longs for their death and wants to make her his puppet. Only she promised that she would not allow her girl to be captured, promising that everything would be fine, hugging her close. A bright light appeared around, and the girl promised the baby that she would cast a spell on her so that she could grow up happy and safe. Wishing for her to live, the girl collapsed tightly on the floor, causing the little girl to start crying again, looking at her mother. The girl continued to scream and shake her mother, hoping that she would still be alive. Agnes looked at this with bated breath and holding back tears, not believing that this was her past. Only this was confirmed by a man in dark clothes, approaching the little girl and calling her Agnes, saying that it was all her fault. The girl herself tried to look at the man, wanting to remember and find out who it was. The hooded man continued that her parents were dead, and her little friend was also injured. In the darkness, his lips slyly spread into a smile, repeating that it was she who was to blame for this. Lightly taking little Agnes by the shoulders, he added that if she had calmly gone with him, then nothing would have happened. The girl could only watch from afar as her memories began to fade. She sadly realized that this was her past, and not all her dreams, also realizing that her parents were no longer in this world. Turning her head, a child's hand appeared under the girl's palm, and Agnes said out loud that this girl was herself, only in childhood. Nodding awkwardly, little Agnes led her by the arm, continuing to lead her to new memories. Approaching closer, a cage appeared in the darkness, above which the man whispered that he had finally received what he needed. Agnes stood behind him, but clearly saw every movement, already hearing the man's words that the girl was now his. He also added that her strength was now his, stretching her hand between the bars of the cage. Grabbing the knife, He, with a sharp movement, ran through the wound on her hand, greedily saying that everything was his now. Despite the little girl's screams, he watched with pleasure as her wound quickly healed under the sparks of magic. Without lowering the knife, he said that he had been looking for her and her miraculous power for a very long time, again raising his hand to cut. It was no longer possible for Agnes to see and hear this, closing her eyes and turning to the side, only hearing the screams of her little self. The girl, having passed out from such pain, lay at the bottom of the cage while her wounds continued to heal, only not so instantly. Turning his back to her, the man dreamily began to imagine how he would become the savior of this world if he could master this magic. Covering her mouth with her hand, Agnes noted with disgust how terrible it was, not having the strength to look any further. The little girl, looking at her, confidently said that her mother was able to protect her. This alone made Agnes turn back, wanting to know how exactly it had saved her. The girl in the cage began to noticeably darken her hair, turning from white to purple. As a little girl, she explained to her adult self that her mother sealed away their powers so that she could live a normal and happy life. Then Agnes awkwardly asked if this was why she lost her memories. To the girl's surprise, she shook her head negatively, leaving only the question of when this happened. Immediately behind her came the voice of a hooded man who couldn't believe why the girl in the cage had changed. Adult Agnes found herself in the body of herself, only small, starting to touch herself, trying to understand how this was possible. Only the man's scream made her turn to him, looking in horror, trying at the same time to understand who it was. The eyes were full of horror and fear, which is why Agnes could not collect herself while looking at the man. With a sharp blow of a knife, he cut her hand with her clothes, watching as the wound did not heal at all. Looking at this, he could not believe his eyes, why this happened and where to do the magic. While Agnes was telling him that it hurt, bleeding, the man fell to his knees, seeing that her strength was gone. Not believing that this could happen, he swung his hand and hit the girl, still shouting that her power belonged to him. Having risen from the floor, the man was already staring at the fallen Agnes, realizing what he had just done to her. Making the girl stand up, he removed her hair from her forehead and touched it, telling her to forget everything that happened earlier. He added that the girl would live here like a doll until the day came when her strength would return. Swinging a knife at her, he lowered it, saying that this would be her curse. In an abrupt moment, Agnes came to her senses, crying from what she saw in her memories. The Duke himself noticed the girl's fear, awkwardly extending his hand to her, asking what was wrong with her. Only for her, it was like a reminder, because the guy looked like that man in the hood. Her eyes turned red as soon as the guy's hand touched her, looking scared, because she now saw him as an enemy. Gilbert noticed her eyes, but a moment later the girl had already hit his hand and ran away. Even while shouting that he should not come closer, the Duke chased after the girl, not understanding what had just happened. Agnes, ignoring that he was calling her, ran and cried, mentally calling for her parents and that boy. Only hearing her tell her to be more careful, a moment later the girl began to fail, falling into the water. Going to the bottom, she realized that she had already lost everyone, mentally asking if it was her fault, as the man said then. The water was cold, and she very soon felt it, releasing the last bubbles of air, realizing that her body was getting heavier. Thinking that in just a little while she would be gone, a familiar male hand reached out to the girl, giving a gap in the water. Opening her eyes, Agnes stared at the one who tried to save her from the water. Gilbert's eyes could be seen from the water, terrified by such an event. He instantly grabbed the girl, dragging her to the shore, trying to let everyone catch their breath. The guy immediately called out to the girl, wanting to make sure that she was okay and alive. Coming to her senses, Agnes turned to him, looking with slightly surprised eyes, not believing that it was he himself in front of her. Then he noticed that the color of the girl's eyes was the same again, although recently it had been red without realizing anything. Because of this, they took a break, lighting a small fire in order to dry out faster. After giving the girl a little rest, he asked if she was okay now, looking with concern. Agnes, without looking back at him, answered that yes, everything was fine, immediately apologizing, because he was wet through and through because of her. Smiling awkwardly, Gilbert said that there was nothing wrong with it, and now it was more important to him that she was safe. Snuggled into the Duke's clothes, she began to say that her memories had suddenly returned. At this time, the guy, listening carefully, collected more sticks for the fire, while Agnes added that they had not returned completely. Closing her eyes to concentrate, she said that when she was little, her house caught fire. Her parents were inside, surrounded by fire in a completely burned house. She was caught by someone in some kind of cage, and whoever did it kept cutting her with a knife over and over again. Gilbert listened to her attentively, without looking away, slightly thoughtful. Agnes herself was lost in thoughts that she clearly remembered that power. Her wounds healed on their own, which was truly a miracle that she herself did not understand. Her mother changed her appearance with the help of her mysterious power, then at the fire, wishing her to be happy. Grabbing her head, she mentally asked herself what she was like, starting to tremble from such pressure. The Duke also noticed this, running up to her and telling her not to put so much pressure on herself. Only Agnes said that she was scared and in pain, asking why this happened, which made the guy feel a little uneasy. She explained that she had to leave, why she ran away, and then fell into the water. Leaning closer to her, Gilbert realized that her memories and reality were mixed up, trying to calm the girl down as well. Only looking at the ground did Agnes cry more, because it scared her, wanting to know what else she could have forgotten, asking if she really is a monster, as Miss Mia said about it, hearing a sharp no from the guy who was already pressing him to her. Hugging Agnes, the Duke said more softly that she was not a monster. Closing his eyes, gently stroking the top of her head, he said that he was finally able to hear the girl's true feelings. He spoke with warmth and tenderness, clearly understanding how painful it was for Agnes, that she was pleased, leaning on the guy herself. Looking up at him hesitantly, she asked if she could still stay here, to which she quickly received the answer yes. Leaning towards the girl's face, Gilbert said, reminding her that he would dispel all the sparks flying in her direction. The guy added that if she feels insecure, she can safely turn to him. He will always help. Agnes looked at him with a smile, while he wished to see her smile more often because they were together, and he would protect her. Holding hands, the girl thanked the guy for everything he had done for her, while he was already offering to go back. When they arrived at the estate, the Duke immediately reported to the employees that Agnes had fallen into the water, surprising everyone. Although she had dried up a little, this did not calm the workers down, just as Gilbert himself pushed the girl towards them. Mylin instantly took Agnes by the arm and led her to sit closer to the fire, while Klaus walked up to the Duke. The girl immediately turned to him, slightly embarrassed by such care around her. Gilbert noticed this immediately, smiling at her and telling her that this was her home now. Agnes was clearly flattered by such words, smiling broadly and shyly at him, feeling warm. The maids immediately set about heating her, bringing her hot tea and adding coals to the fireplace, talking to her. Klaus went with his master to the office, rejoicing and telling him that it was very good that he was okay. Slightly hesitantly, the guy said yes, telling the butler that Agnes's memories were gradually returning. The man, of course, reacted positively, noting that this was simply wonderful news. Only Gilbert darkened slightly, saying that she might be the one he was looking for. A memory immediately came to mind with the very girl he was looking for, realizing that if this was so, her parents died, just like Agnes. He also remembered the crying eyes of the little girl, realizing that she had suffered very much. Only it would all be because of him. Imagining himself as a little boy, imagining whether Agnes would hate him for this if she found out. However, clenching his fists, Gilbert promised that this time he would truly protect her, even if she hated him. Without looking back at the butler calling him, the guy said that he would have some request for him. In the morning, opening the curtains, Malin woke up Lady Agnes, wishing her good morning right away. The girl immediately woke up while the maid said that the weather was wonderful today. She only had time to say good morning in response and sit up on the bed when the girl told her to quickly get ready. Surprising Agnes, the lady asked if something was planned today, to which she only clapped her hands, smiling broadly. Only the girl, half asleep, did not understand at all what was happening, watching everything with round eyes. After the clap, several maids appeared in the room at once, conveying that the lady was going on a date with the Duke, and they would prepare her to look amazing. She sat dumbfounded on the bed, realizing that she was going on a date, which began to confuse her greatly. The midday sun was already peeking through the window, but everyone continued to decorate and dress the girl. While some maids were doing makeup and manicures, others were arguing about the color of her dress. One suggested wearing blue, because it suited her hair color better, while the other suggested wearing pink, because it would highlight the lady's complexion. Malin, while doing her makeup, noticed out loud how the blush suited her, only thinking that it was too muted, but still admiring it. Only Agnes felt awkward about what was happening, asking her not to try so hard for it. Only the maids unanimously said that it was worth it, because she was going for a walk with the Duke, and they would do everything possible. The girl had to admit awkwardly, embarrassedly asking them to help her get ready then. Very soon she met the guy, conveying her apologies for the delay, making him look back. The maids who escorted her out immediately bowed, while Agnes stared at him a little embarrassed. Only he didn't say anything, which made her worry. He asked if she looked strange. All the girls who worked for us with her appearance were afraid and worried about the answer, anxiously awaiting the reaction. Looking away, Gilbert embarrassedly said that she was incredibly beautiful. This delighted both the girls and Agnes, who smiled at him as the maids cheered. Walking outside, the girl was very interested in where they would go on the carriage. Hearing the quick answer that they were heading to the city, Gilbert said that she had been at the estate all this time, which is why he suggested going to the city and changing the situation. Agnes was pleased with such care, lowering her gaze and blushing from this. However, she did not have to refuse, and already taking the Duke's hand, saying thanks to him, she got into the carriage. Agnes looked at the landscapes and views from the window with great curiosity, admiring the city. The Duke also noticed this, asking if she had never been to the city, to which she awkwardly admitted that she was never allowed to leave the estate, only dreaming about such things. The people around greeted the carriage with a smile, waving and smiling widely, showing kindness. As she exited the carriage with Gilbert's help, she awkwardly asked where they were going. Only he honestly admitted that he had not yet decided where to go. Removing her hand, Agnes then awkwardly asked if there was really no specific reason for coming here. Looking at her tenderly, the Duke admitted that there was no reason why they would do what she wanted today. Gilbert also added that he knew that since he was saying this at the last moment, he understood that she might simply get confused, thereby surprising Agnes a little. Therefore, to begin with, they will look at her several new outfits, already trying them on in the store. The Duke already in the store said that he was buying all the outfits because they all looked great on the girl, making the workers happy but embarrassing the girl. The next store was a shoe store where the ladies kindly measured feet to find the right shoes. Without even having time to try on all the hats that were offered in the next store, Gilbert immediately bought each one. The butlers quickly carried all the purchases, packed in beautiful boxes, into the carriage, storing them away. Seeing how the carriage was filled with things from above, Agnes awkwardly told the Duke that she did not need anything else, because he had already bought her so many things, to which she heard that she should say where she would like to go. Gilbert also added that if she didn't say anything, they would continue shopping, and the next one would be a jewelry store, which confused her greatly. Agnes tried to quickly figure out where to go, hesitating while the guy smiled maliciously, but was also glad that she had become much better at showing her emotions. Then the girl's gaze stopped in the crowd, seeing a little girl holding a stuffed bunny, and that's what attracted her. She immediately remembered how, when she was little, she already worked as a maid, carrying heavy buckets of water. Nearby, Carla ran and played along the corridors with her toy while she was warned about the danger. Only she didn't listen to them, smiling widely and hugging her teddy bear. Little Agnes really liked the toy then, staring dreamily at him. Carla also saw this look, immediately hiding her teddy bear, asking her what she was staring at because her father bought it for her, ordering her not to look at her with those empty eyes. At this moment, she froze a little, and soon began quietly talking about the teddy bear. Gilbert, having honestly heard nothing, immediately asked again, hoping for an answer. Bowing her head and blushing more, Agnes repeated more loudly that she would really like a teddy bear, folding her hands. The Duke was slightly embarrassed and only said with a smile that she had finally said what she wanted. A little later they stopped at a cafe, where the guy began to wonder how the walk was for her. Agnes's new friend sat next to them as she said she enjoyed everything, thanking him for all the shopping he did for her. Gilbert honestly admitted that after yesterday, he simply could not leave her alone, hoping that she did not feel locked in. The girl began to awkwardly wave her hands, showing her denial that this was not so. Chuckling, he was definitely amused by this reaction, smiling awkwardly at her. Gently taking her hand, the guy said that he was incredibly happy to live with her until her memories returned. He also added that she had not found a groom for her, to which Agnes looked at him smiling. Slightly embarrassed by their hands and the guy's words, she still agreed that she was incredibly happy next to him. Moreover, she was incredibly happy about her engagement to the Duke, only beaming and blushing more. Gilbert himself noticed that she was now comfortable enough to say what she thought. At the same moment, opening their eyes, their gazes met, as if looking at each other, creating something beautiful around. Closing her eyes back, Agnes mentally understood that she wanted to stay here forever, but she was afraid that if she said this, she would only cause problems for the guy. Immediately, they were interrupted for a moment by a screaming man who called for my lord, clearly not believing that he could meet him here. Recovering his breath, he conveyed that there was something he needed to discuss with him. Immediately, for some reason, he felt uncomfortable, worried that Agnes had also seen, slightly surprised. Getting up from her seat, the girl immediately said that she would wait for him here, thinking that this made him nervous, adding that she was no longer a child. Only this did not give him more peace of mind, slightly wondering what to do. Instructing her to sit down, Gilbert began to ask her to stay here then, a little worried about this while she smiled, instilling confidence. To be sure, he asked her to immediately promise that she would stay where she was. Agnes, smiling of course, agreed, nodding and telling him in return a promise to keep him calm. Time passed, and this began to worry the girl because she kept waiting. Only he did not return, so trying to calm herself down with thoughts that the gentleman needed time, she stubbornly waited. Distracted from her thoughts by various things, like a leaf behind her, someone's hand reached out to the toy, wanting to grab it. Looking back, Agnes only had time to see how the toy had already been grabbed by the head, taking it for herself. It was some hooligans who asked if she was really sitting here with this teddy bear all alone. They invited her to spend time with them, but the girl was only worried about getting her toy back. Reaching for the toy, getting up from her seat, she asked him to return it, when the blonde guy began to tease her, thinking it was very cute how she longed for him to return. He immediately grabbed her hand, inviting them not to linger here and go to another place. Grabbing her, the other guy added that she would clearly have more fun with them than at this tea party, only scaring her more. Mentally asking someone to help her, a guy came out from behind the doors of the cafe, ordering her to be released, attracting attention. He came out in formal clothes, clearly with some kind of high status, looking arrogantly at the hooligans who pestered Agnes. Coming closer to them, the stranger repeated louder and more clearly that they should let the girl go. She awkwardly stared at the guy, not quite understanding how he wanted to help. However, the hooligans became interested in the hero, letting go of Agnes, pushing her away and banging their fists, asking who he even was. One of them approached and grabbed him by the collar, lifting him up and asking how he dared lecture them. The girl immediately became concerned about what was happening, approaching him and demanding that he stop it now. The stranger immediately looked back at her, smiling and looking tenderly at her courage, embarrassing Agnes. Turning to the hooligan, he said that the restaurant employees had been watching them all this time. Stretching out his hand, he immediately shouted that there were hooligans here, clearly stressing them out and intimidating them. Instantly, the stranger grabbed Agnes's hand, running away, telling her to follow him. While the guys were confused, he explained that in such situations, the best solution would be to run. One of the guys quickly guessed that he wanted to make them look like fools, throwing a teddy bear after them. Bouncing, the toy flew towards them while the guy and Agnes took refuge in the park. Leaning against the wall, they were both short of breath after such running around in the situation. Remaining calm, the girl turned to the guy, wanting to say something, stuttering slightly. Only he immediately covers her mouth with his hand, causing Agnes more surprise. They stood opposite each other near this wall, looking at each other in slight shock. Then the stranger pointed with his finger to be quiet now, hearing the voices of the hooligans. They swore that they had lost track of the couple, thinking that they had gone somewhere deep into the forest, following there. He carefully looked over his shoulder at those guys, wanting to make sure that they had left. When this happened, the stranger calmly exhaled, already letting go of Agnes, saying that they had left. Hesitating awkwardly, she bowed to him, conveying her thanks. The guy waved her off and said that there was no reason because it seemed to him that she was in trouble. Standing opposite each other, Agnes had already raised her head, making acquaintances and introducing herself. As if enchanted, the guy repeated her name, noting that it was very cute and suited her. Such a compliment slightly surprised and alerted the girl at the same time, looking slightly confused. Putting his hand to his chest, he introduced himself as Isaac Hagen, apologizing for taking him so far, almost into the forest. Awkwardly proving that there was nothing wrong because he helped her, the guy began to clear his throat, which worried Agnes. Asking if everything was okay, Isaac explained that it was just shortness of breath from running, which is why she already apologized for having to run. Having said that she would like to repay him for his help, but she was interrupted by her thoughts, because she had nothing. Looking away, she felt uncomfortable because she would have to ask Mr. Gilbert to repay her. Immediately, the guy turned to her, noticing some anxiety and excitement that she looked away. Smiling broadly, he suggested in this case that they drink tea at the table where she had been sitting before. A little earlier, the Duke was deciding questions about the return of a certain cult, reading in the papers. Thanking that he was immediately notified, he suggests immediately preparing and developing a strategy. The man added to this that he continued to collect information when another man knocked on the door, asking if my lord was still here. Handing the papers to the first man, Gilbert said slightly rudely that he had to go, as the man still said about the thing he was leaving for him. He turns out to have fixed it, now returning it to the Duke with some pride. Looking at his watch, the guy immediately thanked him, slightly thinking about something pleasant, praising the man for his work. Coming out of the building, the first man finally decided to ask if the girl who was with him was his bride. Closing his eyes, slightly imagining Agnes and thinking, he replied that this was not entirely true. As Gilbert returned to the table where he had been with her, he mentally admitted to himself that he had kept her waiting too long. He immediately noticed that the girl's teddy bear was lying on the grass, which made him wary. Before his eyes appeared the image of the same girl who was with him, only her back was turned. Little he rushed through the streets of the city, begging someone to stop, so that they would come back, running ahead after them. Grabbing the toy in his hands, the guy couldn't believe it was her, calling Agnes in concern. Isaac sat opposite her, eating and smiling brightly, looking straight into her eyes, almost glowing with joy. His mood made the girl more and more uncomfortable, while the guy praised the taste of the sweets in this establishment. Turning her head to the plate, she thought uncomfortably about Gilbert, because they returned to their previous place. But he was still not there. The chair next to her was now empty, and she wondered how she would tell the Duke that she had lost the teddy bear he had given her. Immediately, Isaac's voice jerked her out of her thoughts, looking at him slightly distracted. He awkwardly asked if the person she was waiting for was really that scary since she looked so worried. Asking if he could harm her, Agnes shouted no, saying that the man was very kind, explaining to Isaac that she owes her life to him, slightly surprising him. Thinking about Gilbert, she smiled and wanted to say how she felt with him from the very beginning of the meeting. Only the guy grabbed her hands and said that she finally smiled, slightly confusing and surprising her. Gently hiding her palms in his hands, he asked Agnes to smile more often because it suits her crazy. The girl did not react to this, only remembering that some small boy had already told her exactly the same thing. Isaac also noticed this confusion, asking what was wrong with her, worrying. Looking away and trying to remove her hand, Agnes explained that she felt like someone had told her this in the past. Leaning towards her, touching her face, the guy noticed that perhaps they had already met before, continuing to surprise her. Isaac added that as soon as he saw the girl, he immediately felt something familiar, which made him think that this was not the first time they had met. Then she began to think that this man could have been familiar to her all along from the past. Raising Agnes's head to himself, he added that perhaps he and she, when his speech was interrupted by the Duke's cry that he was calling the girl. Gilbert was slightly angry, clutching the toy under his hand as he approached the table in annoyance. Coming closer, he called the girl again, looking askance at the guy who was next to her. She seemed to say his name with slight surprise, but turned to him with great joy, which killed the mood of her new acquaintance. He immediately outraged Gilbert, grabbing his hand and squeezing it, saying that he should not even dare touch Agnes, asking who he was. She awkwardly tried to stop the gentleman, wanting to explain everything, as Isaac himself began, which he could not believe. Looking askance at the Duke, he repeated more loudly that he could not believe that he'd gone away, leaving such a sweet lady alone. The guy was slightly outraged by such impudence, looking at him in response threateningly. Here Agnes herself inserted the word that this man helped her, saying that some cruel people tried to take her somewhere. Almost frightened, Gilbert asked what happened, having already approached her. Crossing his hands, Isaac himself added that he, having gotten rid of those bullies who were bothering Agnes, was sitting here, playing the role of her bodyguard. Adding, of course, that he would have to pay for his tea, while Gilbert exhaled and realized what had happened. He stood opposite his new acquaintance, apologizing for his rudeness, which slightly puzzled the guy. Immediately introducing himself to him, he thanked him for protecting Agnes, to which the girl herself bowed to him. Isaac was quite surprised by this change of mood from the Duke, standing slightly surprised and staring at him. Handing the toy back to the girl, Gilbert invited the guy to join them for dinner as a thank you. Agnes clearly liked the way the guy began to behave with his new acquaintance, looking at him and smiling, hugging his teddy bear. Slightly embarrassed as he looked at her, Isaac happily agreed as he admired her. Having already returned to the estate, she mentally replayed in her head the moment when the guy thought that they had seen each other before, mentally telling herself that this could not have happened. The three of them sat alone at dinner where Isaac immediately began to thank him for the invitation, boasting that he had canceled all plans for the evening. Agnes immediately apologized, because it was because he helped her then near the restaurant. Then the guy began to convince her that there was nothing like that in the plans, just a boring meeting with his professor, which made the girl curious about what he was studying. The guy raised a glass of wine, again introducing himself to the Duke that he was Isaac Hagen, studying at the City Medical Academy. Agnes looked at him curiously, not believing that he was a doctor, asking about it. Smiling awkwardly, the guy explained that he was not a doctor yet, changing the topic. He keenly noticed that he was the complete opposite of the gloomy Duke who kills his brides, clearly wanting to offend. But Gilbert only frowned, and the girl tensed. Worried about how the guy himself might react to this, she instantly looked at him with eyes of complete shock. However, the Duke slightly hid his real reaction by sipping from a glass of wine with his eyes closed. Only Isaac continued that he did not at all expect that the man whom the girl had been waiting for half a day would be that same deadly Duke, already making her feel awkward. Wanting to change the subject, Agnes asked him, addressing him by his last name, that the study of medicine must not be easy, considering his desire to be a doctor amazing. The guy suggested that she not adhere to such formalities, which is why Gilbert opened his eyes slightly, looking at what he was doing. Isaac took the girl's palm, smiling at her, adding that he was the same age as her, so she could easily just call him by name. Only Agnes's gaze was on their hands, which the guy simply took into his without asking, as the Duke watched. His gaze quickly darkened, staring menacingly at Isaac, silently responding to such impudence. Noticing this, the guy immediately removed his hands, showing them specifically to Gilbert. Looking back into the guy's eyes, Isaac sharply remarked to him that if he looked at everyone with that look, the girl would not be able to make friends. Agnes was already worried about these words, looking first at the Duke and then at the guy, feeling like something bad was hanging between them. Isaac added that he went out of his way to help the girl escape from those terrible guys, twisting his hand. Only now he needs to return her to the murderous Duke, which Gilbert did not really like in his statement. Having said that he was worried about Agnes, she immediately stood up, looking slightly angrily at the guy, interrupting his slightly rude speech. She said that he misunderstood, because the gentleman is a very kind man and did not harm her. Looking away at the table, the Duke was slightly embarrassed by such speech from the girl, but silently continued to listen. She continued that it was thanks to the guy that she went out into the city today, since she usually did not leave the estate. Having also expressed that she was very happy about this, Gilbert smiled a little, because it was nice that it turned out the way he wanted. Looking up at Agnes, she looked at him in response, which is why both blushed and remained silent, embarrassed to add anything. Isaac, watching from the sidelines, only wondered to himself how to perceive this and what to count. Towards evening, already thinking of leaving, he again thanked the couple for dinner when they went out to see him off. Bowing weakly to him, Agnes also thanked him because he had helped her today. Turning the girl towards the exit, Gilbert slightly rudely said that they were leaving, to which the guy asked to wait a minute. He immediately turned to the girl, asking if he could visit her at the estate, smiling widely at her. He slyly added that, thanks to her company, he had even gotten a little used to being in the Duke's company, receiving a reproachful look from him. Only he immediately turned his gaze to Agnes, wanting to know her reaction, but she froze and looked at Isaac with round eyes. Sighing, the Duke looked at him and replied that he should do as he pleases. Staring at the girl, the guy, beaming with joy, calmly shouted hooray. Turning to exhale, stopping at the door, he waved at her, wanting to see her again. Agnes just looked at him while the guy relaxed from his new acquaintance. Having only time to turn around, she immediately began to thank Gilbert for such gratitude to Isaac. The Duke instantly hugged her, answering that she herself had adequately thanked the guy instead of him. With a worried look, he softly added that he was very glad she was safe. Calling him awkwardly, Agnes realized that the guy was trembling, not understanding what could happen. Gilbert, as if recognizing that she understood, said that when he found the teddy bear abandoned in the grass, the ground seemed to disappear from under his feet. It seemed to him that he had lost the girl again, which is why she asked how it could be again. The Duke explained that he had been separated from one person in this city and had not seen her since. Starting to hug him back, Agnes awkwardly asked if he was talking about his fiancée. Confused, Gilbert replied that it was, while the girl remarked that this girl must be very happy because the guy worries so much about her. She also reassured him that he need not worry because she would never disappear. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed her hand on his shoulder, hugging him, giving him warmth. Leaning towards her, Gilbert noticed how strong she had become, slightly surprising her. He noticed how much she had changed while Agnes made excuses that it was all thanks to him. After all, now she finally again feels the moving clock inside herself that once stopped. Sticking his hand into his jacket, the Duke admitted that when he looks at her, he thinks about this. He handed Agnes the watch that the man had repaired for him, inviting her to take it so that she could keep track of the passing time. She looked at this wonderful blue watch with admiration, not knowing what to say. Gilbert said his mother gave them to him when he was a child, and from that day on he wanted to see them on her hand. Agnes only became more uncomfortable with such a gift, embarrassed and refusing to accept such a valuable thing. However, the guy insisted because he wants her to have them, thereby embarrassing her more, adding that she believes she changed because of him, but she also changed him. Therefore, the new watch that was passed from the guy's palm was already lying beautifully on the girl's hand. Gilbert conveyed that he was incredibly glad that he had met her, which made both of them shine with something pleasant. Smiling widely, Agnes thanked the Duke for such a generous gift. Because of this, at the end of the day, she had a rose, a bear, and a watch on her chair, all gifts from her boyfriend. Isaac came out of the estate, slightly gloomy, walking along the street. Stopping in front of someone, he reported that she was no longer a soulless doll, and now her former character was returning to her, adding that it was the right decision to send her to the Duke. He handed everything over to the hooded man, under whom Milord Ubel was hiding, and listened to everything with wild eyes. Another day in the office, the Duke looked at Agnes's answers, saying that her result was generally good. Noticing that she was a quick learner, the girl complimented her and said that this was due to the fact that she had a good teacher. Gilbert was clearly flattered by such words, smiling brightly as she did at him. Only their moment of pleasant moment was ruined by the butler's voice, conveying that they had guests. Klaus received his guest, who turned out to be Isaac, who immediately flew to hug Agnes. She herself was very surprised to see him, and asked again if it was him. Only the embarrassed guy was already hugging her, pressing her to himself, saying that he had come to see her. The Duke definitely did not like this greeting gesture, looking askance at the guy and his embrace with the girl. Very soon they moved to the terrace, where Isaac again generously thanked him for being invited today. He immediately folded his hands and called Mr. Dalrix, looking at him slyly. The guy tried to react calmly, which Agnes also noticed, mentally thanking him. He continued that he was honored to be a guest at his estate. Only one thing was more important to him, smiling broadly. Grabbing Agnes by the hand, he noticed that he was very happy to see her again, which surprised her. Beaming with happiness, Isaac said that he would really like to see her room, making her slightly uncomfortable. Immediately thinking that this could be a bad and inconvenient idea, he suggested immediately going to the garden, while Gilbert looked at him with an unkind look. Turning her gaze to the guy, Agnes herself immediately thought that the three of them could do it. With slight pity, Isaac said that he wanted to fast only with her, together and alone. He explained this by saying that the Duke kept looking at him with such a terrifying expression on his face that he felt uncomfortable, which is why the Duke immediately looked away. Folding his hands indignantly, Gilbert reminded that Agnes was formerly his fiancée. Only the girl herself was slightly embarrassed by this statement, blushing but silently. Waving his hand, Isaac himself repeated that, yes, technically he knows this, as if saying this with disgust. After all, since she was sent here, everyone believes that she was killed by the murderous Duke. Only it all turned out that she found a new life, spreading her wings into the open world. Putting his hands under his chin, Isaac asked if he was wrong somewhere now. Turning to the Duke, he asked that they had clearly become too close. Then it would be difficult to let go, wouldn't it? Smiling slyly. Only Gilbert did not buy such a provocation. Everyone looked rudely in his direction. In such a verbal skirmish, the girl felt a little superfluous, not knowing what to say. But then the Duke said that Agnes is now an important member of the Dedricks family, which is why her embarrassment knew no bounds from such words. He also noticed that she was now the bride of the murderous duke, which made her more happy. Because of this, she looked at him tenderly and smiling, calling him quietly. The guy himself looked at her, smiling back, seeing how she was beaming with happiness. Isaac also watched their silent glances, observing how good they were. Throwing out his hands, he said that it looked like there was a third wheel, casually saying that he was thinking about helping poor Agnes with amnesia. These words surprised her greatly, because she had never told the guy anything like that, asking herself how he knew about it. Moving into the office, Isaac explained that he was also currently attending psychology classes. He knew it wasn't the loss of memories, but the fact that they lay dormant somewhere in the depths of her consciousness. While doing some research to find records of similar symptoms, he discovered that there were several cases in which hypnosis helped. Only Gilbert was infuriated by this, asking if he was really going to experiment on Agnes, because he could not even imagine what kind of suffering he would subject her to if he forced her to open her memories before she was ready. Ringing the chain and the stones on it, Isaac confirmed that this was not excluded. Leaning over Agnes, he mentioned that the choice was hers alone, smiling slyly. He encouraged her that you can't always sit on the defensive, because if you don't go on the offensive sometimes, you'll never move forward. Because of this, Agnes was already thinking seriously, silently for a minute, and squeezing her skirt with tension. She immediately answered that if there was a chance that it would work, then she would like to try, which made Gilbert worry. Only her eyes were full of confidence, trusting Isaac, asking him to begin hypnosis. The guy immediately looked at the Duke and asked to leave them alone, because it would be dangerous if they lost concentration. Gilbert didn't quite trust the guy and thought a little about what to do. Leaning towards Agnes, he quietly conveyed that if something happened, she would immediately call him, receiving a slight nod. Distrust still remained. Why did the Duke simply leave to stand outside the door without closing the door if something happened? Isaac began to lay the girl on the pillow, asking her to relax and lie down. Gently rocking the pendant from side to side, the guy told him to look at the pendant and concentrate only on his voice, suggesting that he look for happy memories. Agnes gradually sank into the darkness, listening to a voice that asked her what had brought her happiness in the past. The faces of her parents immediately appeared clearly in front of her, realizing that they had brought happiness in the past. Her estate also came to mind, where everyone spent their lives together, communicating well with the maids. From time to time, she saw her boyfriend, also having fun on the street. Then Isaac asked her to describe this friend as she remembered him, but she didn't know at all. Agnes realized that she could not remember his name or face, completely in a fog. Continuing to pump the stone, he added whether she really didn't remember anything at all. Closing her eyes again, she remembered that they had made a promise to each other, trying to remember what it was. Closing her eyes, it immediately occurred to her that the boy was asking her to smile next to him, trying to remember the second thing. Only the memory was only vague in her head, trying to remember it through words. Isaac instantly interrupted her, as if he had read what the promise was about staying together forever. Agnes seemed to immediately see the light, recognizing this phrase word for word, not understanding how the guy knew it. All red, he repeated it, explaining that these were his words, glowing more with joy. While Agnes rose to sit, he leaned forward confidently and said that he was sure at first that it was she. Hugging the girl, Isaac shouted that he had been looking for her for an insanely long time, that tears were now gathering in his eyes. He said that she was the same girl to whom he made his promise, shedding an accumulated tear. Only Agnes was in some shock, not believing that Isaac was the boy from her memories. The guy dropped the stone from his hand, which is why the Duke immediately entered the office at the noise. He watched in surprise as the guy hugged Agnes without any meaning, even though he was talking about hypnosis. As he came closer, he hurled insults at Isaac Hagen, which made the girl uncomfortable. Only the guy thanked my lord with a sly grin without letting her go. The guy stood slightly in a stupor, looking menacingly at Isaac, not understanding why he was thanking him. The guy, stroking Agnes's hair, added that he had brought it together again, and this had just been confirmed thanks to her memory. He said that she was his fiancée, putting the girl into greater shock as if not quite trusting her. However, Isaac continued that they were separated as children, and all this time he was looking for his girlfriend. Gilbert looked at him in horror, not trusting his words, only frowning more and more. Only the guy cunningly asked if he could return it to him, calling him the deadly Duke. After all, he and Agnes made a promise to each other to get married as children, all staring at the guy. Gilbert still couldn't believe it, only frowning more at this fact. Only Isaac added that he was deeply imprinted in the girl's childhood memory. However, Agnes herself was still trying to remember and imagine whether the guy could be that same boy. Smoothing the girl's hair, the guy said that he had been looking for her for a very long time, already calling her his own. However, Gilbert said that he was mistaken, which surprised Agnes, causing her to turn in his direction. Listening carefully, the Duke stood confidently, clenching his fists, saying that it was definitely not him, saying it confidently. The girl herself was already calling him, wanting to know what he would say and why he thought so, while Isaac straightened her hair. Then the guy himself realized that he said this too confidently, realizing that he couldn't tell her everything yet. With a sly grin, Isaac noticed how the Duke hesitated to tell the truth, deciding to take advantage. Having already placed his hands on the girl's shoulders, he slyly asked why it might not be him. Having asked if Gilbert had evidence to refute his words, he only silently looked away. Running his hands through the locks of Agnes's hair, he asked what was missing, which only made her think about it more. Putting her hair to his face, Isaac slyly added whether he was interfering only because he didn't want the guy to take Agnes. Only the girl herself had already come to this rude monologue, asking the guy to wait a little because she was not sure. She said that she and the Duke were not on such terms, which seemed to slightly upset him. Isaac immediately interrupted her and said that he knew everything perfectly well. Holding her face, he invited her to leave with him before the murderous Duke killed her. He looked straight into her eyes, smiling and slightly beaming with joy to be here now. He said that there was absolutely no need for her to marry some stranger. Gilbert himself heard this conversation, as if holding back from sadness, while his eyes drooped, as if collecting tears from this. Clenching his fists, he turned completely away from it, so as not to see while Agnes stared at him in surprise. She immediately refused Isaac's arms and his offer, shaking her head in refusal. At this word, the Duke also raised his head, as if listening with hope to the girl's words. She added that her memories are still hazy, and she doesn't have enough information to make such serious decisions. Therefore, she refused to remember everything and decide for herself what to do, mentally not wanting to be someone's puppet again. Smiling at her, Isaac only remained silent, looking at her slightly thoughtful. Leaning towards her, he said that everything was fine and he was ready to wait, finishing everything for today. Leaning lower towards her, Isaac slyly added that the next time they met, he would tell her about her own strength. This already greatly surprised and intrigued her, wanting to really find out everything at once. As he left, he again wished him to see him again, not paying attention to the fact that Agnes was calling him, asking him to wait. Gilbert was only more stressed by this situation, silently listening to their conversations. Waving goodbye to the girl, he wished that they would meet again soon, seeing the gloomy aura from the Duke. Passing by him, he said with a sly smile that he was leaving so that he could protect Agnes with all his might. Otherwise, she could have been kidnapped again, which he didn't like, looking at the guy with a threatening and gloomy look. Then Isaac left, closing the door and leaving them alone, in which they began to spend silence. Agnes was honestly lost in her thoughts, trying to understand if Isaac really knew about her power. Although he didn't mention anything specific, leaving behind a mystery, she mentally imagined that guy in her childhood trying to compare. Only her verdict was that it was not him at all, because they didn't look alike, and besides, she was embarrassed by the Duke's answer. Looking in his direction, she mentally asked if he really knew something about this without saying anything. Without looking back at her, Gilbert asked if she should stay here, because she could become Isaac's wife. Turning slightly, he asked if she didn't want to follow him. Agnes's eyes widened, looking at the guy's face as if seeing something bad, worrying about him. Touching his cheek, she asked him back why he looked so unhappy. Gently stroking him, the girl said that she was now engaged to Mr. Gilbert, looking at him tenderly. Agnes added that she could not go anywhere, especially when he had such an expression on his face. Only Gilbert gently turned away from her hand, clenching a fist in his hand which slightly alerted her. He immediately asked why she was trying to stop Isaac, which slightly surprised her. The guy continued, "Doesn't she really want to be with that guy?" While Agnes mentally understood that she could not ignore the information Isaac had, and she needed to talk about it. Only she was silent to Gilbert, lowering her head, which is why he slightly misunderstood this gesture. Because of this, the Duke asked if there was anything she couldn't tell him, looking a little gloomy. Immediately, Agnes began to deny that this was not the case, mentally saddening that now was simply not the time to talk about it. Once again, receiving silence in response, Gilbert clenched his hands and said that he understood everything. Turning around to leave, he simultaneously apologized for such an interrogation, which is why the girl was already worried. Opening the door, he went out into the corridor, assuming that she was tired, letting her rest until dinner. A minute later, Agnes was already sitting alone with her thoughts, not knowing what to do or what to do. In the corridor, Klaus caught Gilbert telling him that the guest had conveyed something when he left. The guy looked up, slightly surprised, when he saw an envelope with a stamp on the tray. The girl was holding the same letter in her hands, reading that the Duke of Weston was throwing a ball. Carla beamed with joy, because this invitation was personal for her, not believing her happy eyes. Her father noted that the whole family was invited, and this would be a great opportunity for her because their meeting could be fateful. Reading Carl's invitation, she couldn't believe it herself, also saying that she couldn't wait for it to happen sooner. Looking at his daughter, Ubel was happy for his daughter, thinking about something of his own. Carla was incredibly glad that thanks to Agnes, she did not have to die at the hands of the murderous Duke. Now she has a chance to meet a worthy man for herself, fantasizing about the ball. Gilbert thought the same about Agnes, wanting to know what she was hiding, and also thinking that it had something to do with Isaac. Only then did he change his mind, realizing that he was actually hiding something from her. He, a little boy, then ran to the Hot estate where Agnes lived as a little girl, looking doomedly and not understanding how this could happen. He couldn't believe with horror how this could happen, considering it completely his fault. Sitting in his office and thinking, Gilbert was afraid to imagine what her reaction would be if she knew that this tragedy had occurred through his fault. He became slightly gloomy when he remembered how Agnes said, stroking his cheek, that she was engaged to him, wondering if she would say that after learning the truth. In the study room, even after classes, the girl continued to read books. The maid soon noticed that the couple spent less time together. The Duke himself was constantly in his office, dealing with papers and documents. Klaus also awkwardly noticed how they began to spend less time alone together. All the maids immediately began to worry about this, discussing whether they could have quarreled, although they immediately changed their minds, because their classes are going on the same way as always. Meiling saw this and knew why she immediately reported to her friends that the problem was different. This alarmed everyone, because it was the couple's time together that was reduced, worrying that the spouses should spend more time together. Then the Duke's butler came to them, offering some cunning idea for them to be together. Very soon Agnes was in the guy's office apologizing for disturbing him, but smiling brightly. Gilbert clearly did not expect to see her, asking what was wrong with her, not quite understanding the essence of the visit. Coming closer to the guy, she said that they told her that he called her, which already outraged the Duke, because he did not do this. Because of this, they looked at each other awkwardly, not understanding how this could happen. The butler immediately entered the office, informing them that the carriage was ready for their departure. Rising from his chair, Gilbert asked what was going on, since he had not ordered anything. Then Klaus reminded that tonight was the Duke Weston's ball. They received an invitation from Mr. Isaac. He also added that they had been informed that the couple would be present, so they wanted them to get together as soon as possible, rather than only further outrage the Duke with their independence. He shouted that this was crossing all boundaries, to which he heard from Klaus that there was nothing like it. He recalled that Duke Weston had been close to the Gilbert family for many generations, and as the current Duke of Diedrichs, he could not miss such an event without a good reason. Having said it awkwardly, the guy wanted to come up with something, because if they go, Isaac will definitely be there. He looked at the girl, slightly wondering whether it was worth going. To his sadness, he realized that Agnes would want to meet that guy, and it would be a mistake to limit her circle of friends, especially based on his tastes, having already looked back at the butler. He also slyly added that it would be a valuable experience for the girl to attend the ball, which made it only a plus to go. Sighing, the guy admitted defeat that he had no reason to refuse. Turning to Agnes, he already asked her if she wanted to go to the ball herself. Now the girl was already thinking that it would be convenient if Isaac was at the ball. She wanted to know more about her power, especially what it was. Of course, that boy also did not give her peace of mind, denying that it could be Isaac. Having collected all her thoughts and ideas, she confidently replied that she would like to go. They quickly found themselves at the event, where Agnes immediately noticed that the guy did not like social events, asking about it anyway, making sure of her guess. A slightly drunk man immediately approached them, recognizing his friend Gilbert, rejoicing at their arrival. The guy immediately greeted Duke Weston, also conveying that he was glad to see him again. He immediately drew attention to his companion, surprised that this was the first time he had brought a girl with him, wanting to get to know each other. Bowing low to him, Agnes introduced herself to him, also saying that she was very glad to meet him. Then Duke Weston realized, asking if she was the bride of the murderous Duke. Raising a glass to her, the man wished her to be careful. Otherwise, he could take over her soul. Smiling, she knew that this person knew that Gilbert was actually very kind by watching them. Despite the Duke's inactivity, they seemed to be good friends and were having fun. She told him that it was really very dangerous, attracting the guy's attention to her. Therefore, she added that it was Mr. Gilbert who was protecting her, slightly embarrassed and smiling widely. He was even slightly embarrassed by these words, which Duke Weston noticed and smiled back. Patting the guy, he wished them a pleasant evening together, causing him a little awkwardness, already saying goodbye and going out into the hall. Agnes looked at him, noticing that he was a good person, which the guy confirmed, saying that he had good intentions. Then the girl's gaze was drawn to the guy's blonde hair, trying to see who it was. However, she quickly became upset because it turned out to be not Isaac, but some other guest. Then Gilbert said that he would not mind if she went looking for the guy, Hagen, asking if he would be wrong. The girl awkwardly turned to him, feeling slightly guilty for this, about to say something. Immediately, the Duke interrupted her, warning her that she was not worried about him. He was fine. Moreover, he added that she is his bride only in words, so she can do as she wishes. He especially noticed that even if she left with him, it would simply mean that the murderous Duke had lost another bride, looking at her a little sadly. The guy told himself that she didn't have to stay next to him. It didn't matter to him where she would go and who she would be with. He wanted her more to be happy. Only her voice asking why he said that brought Gilbert back from her thoughts, twitching from her voice. She stood sadly, pursing her lips, almost trembling at his words recently. The Duke even felt somehow uncomfortable, why he softly called her, hesitating a little to say something. Agnes, staring at him, wanted to say something, starting with I, but immediately fell silent, not knowing what to say. Gilbert himself did not understand what was happening, looking at her, again quietly calling for her to say something. The girl went into her thoughts, realizing that the master already has someone he wants to marry, and one day they will have to part, which made her sad. She had to come to terms with this, deciding that she would remain by his side until then, which gave her some relaxation. Suddenly, a girl approached them, asking for forgiveness and distracting the couple from exchanging glances. Having received attention from both, the girl who came hesitated slightly, again apologizing, staring at the guy. Gilbert asked what was the matter, which made Agnes understand that they should be left alone to talk, retiring into the hall. She thought that even if she voiced her selfish desires, she would only cause trouble for the Duke. Deciding that she just needed to calm down herself, Agnes looked at Gilbert out of the corner of her eye. It seemed to her that the guy was beaming when he got together with the other girl, as if they were clearly having a pleasant conversation. With a light weight on her chest, she wondered if the guy would be the same on the day he found his lost bride. At this time, the girl told the Duke that she saw him from afar, considering him very handsome. Slightly embarrassed, she asked if she could ask him to dance, when her friend immediately stopped her and took her by the shoulder. She rudely told her that she could go dancing, but not with this person, causing her to ask the reason in surprise. She whispered in her friend's ear, although many still heard that it was the murderous Duke. This aroused the interest of the surrounding people, who immediately stared at the guy, not believing that he was that same deadly Duke. Many, not embarrassed that he was nearby and heard them, discussed the rumor that he was killing his brides. Even in the part of the hall where Agnes stood, it became clear that the Duke was at the ball, starting to discuss how creepy he was and whether he was a murderer. She turned around sharply, wanting to express everything to the people, because she knew that Gilbert was not the kind of person they called him. Just as she turned around, she accidentally hit the lady standing next to her, instantly apologizing. When she turned around and wanted to apologize, she froze. The girl turned around in horror, as did Carla, who turned out to be a stranger, looking at her accusingly. While the crowd was discussing the murderous Duke, the lady began screaming at Agnes, not believing her eyes that it was her. She directly asked how this happened and why she was not dead now, more irritated to see her alive in front of him. Agnes was also surprised, but listened to the scream and the repeated question of what she was doing here. She was slightly frightened by this behavior from Carla, silently while she continued to demand an explanation of what was happening. Bowing to the girl, Agnes said that Duke Dedrix treated her very well, while she clarified whether she was talking about the murderous Duke. Carla was in sincere shock, asking again if that same Duke was treating her well. However, with a sly grin, she asked if the girl had simply run away. Folding her fan, Carla continued that she was probably so afraid of death that she ran away from the Duke's estate. And then it seems that someone kind-hearted picked her up, reminding her of how her father once did to her, calling her pathetic. Having risen, the girl began to insult Agnes in her face that she could not even die for the sake of her family, despite everything they had done, calling her useless. Having barely made up her mind, turning her head away, she began to explain that she had not run away and was now with the Duke. Her speech was immediately interrupted by Carla, who couldn't believe that she was talking to her now. Saying that she was too arrogant, the girl began to lift her dress with her foot, which is why Agnes immediately noticed, not understanding what she was doing. A moment later, Carla stepped on her foot, causing her to stumble and begin to fall back, where the waiter stood with glasses of champagne. A tray of drinks fell to the floor, causing the sound of breaking glass, and many guests turned to see what was happening. Agnes herself turned around, seeing what had happened and feeling a little guilty towards the worker and the dishes, while the girl looked on arrogantly. Immediately, Carla looked at the girl, asking what she was worth, demanding that she clean up the place right away. Lowering her head, Agnes obediently sank to the floor in front of the fragments, reaching for them, saying that she was terribly sorry. The rest of the guests watched in disgust as she took the sharp shards of broken glasses with her bare hands. Carla, looking arrogantly, added that she was just a vile rat. Even wearing an elegant dress, she would not hide her true essence. While the others watched, the lady continued that crawling on the floor suited her very well, causing Agnes to feel ashamed, mentally knowing that she should have stood up for herself. However, unfortunately for herself, the girl understood that in front of Lady Carla she was turning into her former self. A servant. Immediately, the deadly Duke himself walked through the crowd, looking at this picture and asking what was going on here. Agnes immediately recognized his voice without looking up, feeling how she was getting better. Gilbert himself looked at this picture, immediately seeing it, heading towards it, looking regretfully. Covering herself with a fan, Carla herself apologized for the noise, conveying that it was all because of the rudeness of this lady on the floor. He sat as close as possible to Agnes, while she sat a little in shock, not knowing what to do. The guy gently took the fragments from her hands, telling her that if she touched them with her bare hands, she might cut herself. Guiltily putting down the fragment, Agnes raised her head and began to explain that it was she who broke the glasses. Sighed, Gilbert called her by name, not understanding what she was doing. Holding her palm with one hand, he asked what she was doing now, looking straight into her eyes. While Agnes looked up at him more, the guy said that she was clearly no longer a servant to do this. He was gentle and smiling with her, looking softly into her eyes, giving her more confidence that she was safe. Immediately, he called the waiter standing next to him, asking what he was doing. Looking back at him slightly, he conveyed that he would apologize for what his companion had done, but asked whether the waiter really should just stand and watch what was happening. The guy immediately came to his senses, conveying his apologies, saying that he would clean everything up right away. Leaving for the necessary things, the couple quickly rose from the floor while Gilbert held the girl's hand. She tried to calm down when the Duke immediately leaned towards her ear, slightly beckoning, drawing the attention of her eyes to himself. He told her not to dare to immediately apologize for any accidents. Moreover, he reminded her that she was his fiancée, demanding not to forget this, which clearly lifted her spirits, causing Agnes to smile more boldly at him, embarrassed. Carla remained behind her, continuing to say that this Duke who picked her up must be very strange. Of course, Gilbert himself heard this, turning to Agnes and asking who she was. Carla looked at her slyly and askance, wanting her to admit that she was her maid. Only Agnes was more cunning, telling the guy that she didn't know this girl at all, smiling faintly. These words caused Carla to be quite furious, looking at her back and asking how this was so. Only no one was listening to her anymore, because they had walked away a little and stood together, which is why the lady did not dare to come up and somehow humiliate her again. Isaac had just arrived from the carriage on the street and was getting out, realizing that it was already so late and he would be in trouble. Looking at the estate, he was still more interested in whether Agnes was there, because he desperately needed her. Clearing his throat, he mentally remembered the girl and admitted that she was very nice. Many guests were already leaving the ball, while Isaac mentally replied that he could not wait any longer. He wanted to quickly check how real Agnes's real power was, clearly planning something bad. Looking at the crowd back at the ball, the guy suggested that they act according to the previously drawn-up plan. Ubel stood near the window, confirming Isaac's words, because if he went, then Agnes would be wary. Moreover, it seemed to him that she definitely could not refuse their offer to the guy. The man also suggested that the guy could at least enjoy the ball with her when he was interrupted by a strong cough from him. Isaac turned away from this attack, to which the man asked, as if mockingly, if he had caught a cold. Blood appeared on the guy's hand, which came from the fact that he was coughing so much, answering Ubel that it was just him laughing too much. The man noticed the blood, saying that he had his own circumstances, so they both needed to force the girl to quickly awaken her powers. Isaac also agreed with this, adding that he could still achieve this by promising himself. In the hall, Agnes answered the Duke that she did not know the lady behind her, mentally realizing that she had changed. She looked at Gilbert confidently, mentally answering to herself that she was no longer a servant, constantly living in fear of the former lady. This behavior only irritated Carla more, looking at her back and not understanding how she even dared to behave like that. Unable to bear it, she asked how she even dared to say such a thing, since she served her in her own home, and now she expresses herself like that. The girl turned around at this cry, saying that now Agnes Wilfred was dead, clearly pleasing the Duke. Smiling, she added to the lady that her faithful puppet was no longer here. Biting her lip in anger, Carla couldn't believe why the girl was so bold and how she allowed herself to behave so rudely. Then she bowed, conveying that she was very sorry, asking forgiveness for this. However, nothing more happened, and he and the Duke turned away and walked away into the crowd. Carla continued to stand and look at them for a while, in shock and horror at what had just happened. She never let go of her anger, and even during the music, fanning herself with a fan, she glanced angrily at Agnes. She was constantly next to the guy, having a good time, where he even smiled from her presence. Carla mentally darkened, thinking that the girl was smiling like that, as if trying to humiliate her. She furiously could not believe that he had trained the girl so well she forgot who she served, promising not to forgive her for such behavior. Looking at Agnes, she couldn't believe that she was so happy, wanting to destroy her happiness. The lady's gaze, of course, was felt by her, mentally asking herself not to pay attention to her. Lowering her head, she admitted that she did not want to see her anymore, when Gilbert immediately called her. He asked Agnes if she wanted to go home, because she looked tired enough to continue the ball. She answered with joy, wanting to return, mentally understanding that she wanted to ask Isaac about what he knew at the ball. Before he even had time to remember, the guy immediately appeared calling the girl, waving his hand and smiling widely, wanting to fly to her. Conveying that he was very glad to see her, apologizing for being so late, the Duke stood in front of him, greeting her first. Slightly angrily, he wished Isaac to keep his distance from his bride, which clearly angered the guy, but he remained silent. Standing, he irritably reminded her that she was the Duke's temporary fiancée, and now he was just diligently playing the role of the girl's bodyguard. Carla also watched from the sidelines, not understanding what was happening there now. She especially couldn't believe that the dirty rat Agnes was able to get the attention of two men at once, which she observed. Slightly embarrassed, she admitted that both guys were so handsome looking at their faces. She stood and clenched her fists in her hands and denied it, thinking that this must be some kind of mistake, because she should not lose to this upstart. Gilbert thanked the guy for the invitation, because they had a good evening and were already getting ready to go home. Then Isaac leaned towards her, saying that she did not have to leave with the Duke, to which he dryly received that she would go with him. Why, leaning closer to her ear, he reminded her that he said that he knew about her strength, offering to talk about it in private. Agnes mentally answered to herself that this was the only reason she came here, of course agreeing. She awkwardly asked Gilbert to wait for her for a few minutes, promising to return soon. Having lowered his eyes, the guy understood that in the end the girl became interested in Isaac. Sighing, he nevertheless agreed, warning that if she was delayed, he would go looking for her. Gilbert said he didn't like interfering in her conversations with friends, as if he were reassuring himself with the word friend. However, walking past Isaac, there was clearly an uneasy tension between the guys. Agnes also saw this, feeling some awkwardness because of this looking at them. Then the guy asked if the Duke really didn't have his own worries right now, which he didn't really understand, asking what he meant. Moving slightly to the side, the guy pointed to the lady behind him, conveying that she had been looking at him all this time with such passion in her eyes. Carla suddenly realized that it was about her, and slightly embarrassed, she asked what it was about. Agnes also looked at the girl, feeling slightly uncomfortable if Gilbert began to talk to her. However, pushing her aside, Isaac said that they should give other girls a chance at love, suggesting they leave. The Duke was outraged by this behavior, but they only promised him that the girl would return very soon. Wanting to follow them, Carla immediately stopped him, grabbing him by his jacket, which made him have to stop and look back. Holding him, she suggested, of course, that they should talk a little. Smiling slightly slyly, she smiled slyly, thinking in her mind that if she could win him over to her side, she could drive Agnes into a corner. Gilbert looked at her slightly askance, not quite understanding what the girl even wanted. Carla pressed the most important thing, that she knew the girl the guy was with now. Isaac was already pushing the girl into the street, not stopping very soon while she scolded him. Agnes explained to him that it was not very polite to leave the ball like that while the guy began to make excuses. Apologizing to her, he just wanted a little time. But the Duke was too persistent, making it difficult for the guy to carry on a conversation in his presence. Only Agnes justified and reassured this herself, looking at Isaac slightly reproachfully. The guy happily noticed that they were finally left alone with her, moving closer to her. Only she didn't let him get too close, pushing him away, which slightly surprised the guy. Feeling a little cringe that she had been so rude, Isaac asked her why she was avoiding him in the first place. Agnes explained that she had been thinking about something all this time, wanting to know how the guy found out about her memory loss. Thinking a little, Isaac said that it seemed to him, but the girl herself told him about it. Agnes shook her head without listening to the end, answering that it was not so. Continuing to smile, the guy felt a little tension from this question. The girl also looked at him and reminded him that no one knew about her strength either, remembering that her mother also told her to keep it a secret. Asking again how he knew about this, Isaac slightly ambiguously noted that she had already remembered. Then the girl asked what he was doing then, looking a little menacingly and angrily, wanting to know the truth. Isaac began to diffuse the situation, asking her not to make such a menacing face because she really told him about her strength when they were little. Agnes then realized that the boy was not the same boy from before, demanding that he stop lying to her. Without having time to ask anything additional, the guy suddenly began to fall to the ground, coughing, surprising her. Shouting that he would call for help and running into the hall, he abruptly stopped her, asking her to wait and not to know anyone, wiping the blood from his lips. Stopping, Agnes looked at him, slightly worried and alarmed. Rising from the floor and approaching the railing, Isaac explained that he often had such attacks, conveying that everything would soon pass. Leaning on the railing, he was short of breath, sat down on one knee while the girl began to examine his condition. The guy turned noticeably pale, looking slightly red at her as his breathing began to improve. Agnes approached worriedly and asked if this was true so often, settling down next to him. Rising slightly, Isaac explained that yes, it had become quite common, clutching his chest. Examining him, the girl used her knowledge to try to understand what was wrong with him. She saw that he had become paler, and it was also difficult for him to breathe, thinking that the guy might also have a fever. Sitting down normally, he asked why she was now coming so close to him if she had recently kept her distance. Touching his shoulder, she explained that she could not turn away from a suffering man, to which the guy suggested continuing the conversation. Stroking his back, Agnes refused, asking him not to say anything because she didn't want it to make him feel worse. In the hall, Gilbert had to be in the company of a girl, which did not really inspire confidence. Carla awkwardly remarked that she was very sorry that he had to choose someone like Agnes, not imagining how it happened and very sympathetic. The Duke clearly did not really enjoy her company, looking askance and thinking a little about his own. Carla continued that if it was not easy for him to deal with her, then perhaps it would be better to use her as a servant. Having bitten his own lip, the guy was irritated by such words, realizing that most likely this girl must have been her mistress. Gilbert noted that she seemed to know Agnes well, while Carla just continued that this was so, and that she was an extremely unpleasant person. Lady Carla was in sheer shock as she listened to the words of the murderous Duke, who was under the impression that his fiancée Agnes had been treated extremely cruelly until today. Gilbert, slightly hovering over the girl, asked her, adding to his thoughts that she must know how she lived before, doesn't she? Agnes listened to Isaac say that he was already feeling much better, thanking him for that. Extending her hand to him, she invited him to come into the warmth and get something to drink, looking worried. The slightly embarrassed guy refused, repeating again that he was fine and asking her to leave him, especially since she should return to the Duke. Then Agnes's gaze became firmer, removing her hand but insisting that she could not leave him while he was unwell. Adding that she couldn't leave him alone only made the guy more confused and slightly surprised. Smiling at her, Isaac noticed that she was very kind, smiling wider and awkwardly beaming with a pleasant feeling. Agnes also noticed this, looking at him in slight surprise, observing such an emotion in him for the first time. They stood opposite each other, and she felt as if she was speaking sincerely to a guy for the first time. Isaac was slightly surprised, especially looking into the girl's eyes, which made him slightly embarrassed. Agnes looked at him tenderly and sincerely, smiling and slightly glowing with joy along with him. She added that the guy should take better care of himself, which puzzled him a little. The girl explained that by pretending that everything is fine, he only upsets the people close to him. Isaac immediately noticed that she could not know whether there were people in his life who could be called close. Agnes explained that the mere thought of his suffering saddened her, looking at him affectionately, because even if he was lying, he still said that he wanted to be her friend. Having said that this made her very happy, the guy looked at her embarrassedly, not knowing how to respond to such words. Just looking away, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a crowd near the window in the hall, thinking slightly about his own things silently. Agnes herself looked away, saying that Mr. Gilbert had also told her something similar, awkwardly straightening her hair. She remembered that thanks to the Duke, she had improved, starting to take care of herself. She added tenderly that she was different now and was living more cheerfully than ever. Suddenly, Isaac noticed that she was no longer a puppet, which the girl did not immediately hear. Looking at him and asking him what he said, the guy diverted the topic that he would now tell about himself. Then her gaze softened, listening carefully and looking at Isaac, insanely interested. Putting his hand to his chest, he explained that he was born with a chronic disease and did not have long to live, of course not wanting such a fate for himself. Slowly, someone began to creep up on them while Agnes had her back turned, and the guy continued so as not to lose her attention. Isaac said that thanks to the girl's magic, she herself can change people's lives. Only because of this same magic, she lost a lot, which strained her. Looking slightly gloomy, he listed how she had lost her parents, friends, memories, and her own power to magic. Agnes's attention was completely on the guy, which is why the pursuer attacked her from behind with a knife, hanging with it while she did not notice anything. Before the stranger had time to wound the girl with a knife, Isaac immediately fell under him, exposing his back to protect her. The attacking guy was already taken aback by this turn, putting the knife away and only having time to ask what the hell. He looked at the wound. The man instantly tried to hide while Agnes worriedly held Isaac, seeing how blood began to flow from his wound. She was overcome with horror, watching as the guy's clothes became more dirty in the bed, instantly putting her hand to stop the bleeding at least a little. She started screaming while holding him in her arms for someone to come to their aid, but the windows were closed, and music was playing loudly inside. With horror, the girl realized that if she simply called, no one would hear her, thinking of going for help. However, her hand held the blood, which she soon realized because if he let go, the guy could die, and this was most frightening. Suddenly, a memory came to Agnes when she promised the boy that she would save him, no matter what. Her eyes turned red as she realized that she had the same power as her mother. As a child, she promised that she would no longer make new acquaintances until she took control of her power. Her mother also wanted to teach her this, which is why Agnes had a memory of how she told her to do as she told her when she was little. A small butterfly lay on the table in front of her, while her mother whispered in her ear to feel the warm energy inside her. The girl told little Agnes to gently touch her with her power, which she did with concentration. Removing her hands, suddenly a butterfly began to fly in front of her face, which had just recently been lying dead on the table in front of her. Having hugged the girl, her mother also noted with a smile that she had healed the insect, proudly. The girl explained that this is their joint strength, looking affectionately at the girl. Agnes instantly realized that these were her memories, trying to pull herself together and repeat the lesson. Placing her hand on Isaac's wound, she tried to focus her warm energy within herself on this wound. The light around her smoothly changed her hair color, while the girl concentratedly kept her hand on the wound, thinking about her strength. In the hall, Gilbert asked the lady if she was really from the Wilfred family, demanding to know how she dared to mock Agnes. Carla was incredibly indignant at this question, waving her fan in front of her face, asking what he was talking about. Collecting her thoughts, she said that she was the eldest daughter in the Wilfred family, turning her head away from the Duke's gloomy gaze. She noticed that the guy believed Agnes, reproachingly voicing this, while he only became more gloomy at her words. Carla, irritated, shouted out that she was the one who suffered the most from the appearance of the girl in her family. She considered this to be the absolute truth, because before her family only paid attention to her. However, as soon as Agnes appeared at their estate, Carla noticed how her father had changed. She remembered with hatred that he had sheltered the girl, although she always had such an ungrateful expression on her face, still angrily insulting her with a useless, dirty rat. Carla also keenly noticed that they did not mock her, only punishing her when necessary. The lady scoffed and noted that it didn't look like Agnes felt anything, because she didn't laugh or cry, feeling nothing and acting like a doll. Gilbert had already reacted sharply and said, looking sullenly, that it was because of her that the girl became like this, making Carla surprised. Poking her fan at him, the lady demanded to stop this performance, asking that he, a powerless aristocrat from the outback, really wanted to start a quarrel with the daughter of the famous Wilfred family. However, the Duke only sighed at this, turning his head away from the girl, slightly annoyed. For some reason, Carla considered this a small victory, hoping that he understood everything correctly, and retreated in the quarrel, smiling slyly. Gilbert pushed her fan away with his hand, saying that if she had come to him as a bride, she might have behaved exactly as the rumors said. Slightly surprised and blushing, Carla awkwardly asked why she had to come to him as a bride, looking at his frightening gaze. Suddenly, she was overcome with horror, realizing that this man had not only picked up Agnes, it was to him that they had sent the girl. The guy immediately added that he didn't like the nickname, that he was a deadly duke, but sometimes he really wanted to get rid of people like the lady in front of him. Walking back, slightly bumping into other guests at the ball, Carla frightenedly realized that in front of her was the same Duke Diedrichs. Immediately, her heel let her down, causing many guests to look back at the noise of the fallen lady, asking what happened. They stared at her, asking each other if she was drunk, saying what inappropriate behavior. Carla was frightened by such interest in herself and the noise, which was what other people were talking about, looking at her, slightly pursing their lips. Gilbert continued to stand over her, saying that it would not be difficult for him to teach the lady a lesson so that she would never appear in front of Agnes again, causing her to tense up. Hastily getting up, trying to find her fan, the girl began to cover herself that her father was closer to high-status aristocrats than the Duke. Therefore, if he did something, the Duke suddenly interrupted Carl and calmly noted that he was not going to do something with the lady. Suddenly, she froze, sitting on the floor and not understanding what and how Gilbert had come up with. The guy noticed that Agnes had already crossed her out of her life, which was already a good blow to the lady's reputation. Turning around, he added that he would only harm the girl like this if he brought up this problem with her, Carla, again. Leaving for the exit, the Duke only finished that he had nothing more to talk about with her, asking her to forgive him. While everyone was watching the guy, whispering something, Carla lowered her head and looked at the floor, feeling humiliated. Clenching her fists and biting her lip, she told herself that she would never forgive him for how he made her look like a complete fool in front of everyone, promising to make him regret it. Gilbert was already out on the street, starting to look around and calling for Agnes to finally return to their estate. Noticing that the girl was nowhere to be found, no matter how he passed, he mentally worried about what she could do. His mind imagined that she could leave with Isaac, enjoying their evening together. However, shaking his head negatively, the Duke admitted to himself that Agnes was too kind to leave and not tell him anything. Thinking that she might have returned to the hall while he was not looking, he looked back and saw something else that caught his attention and surprised him. At the entrance, opposite the windows, a familiar light was burning for him, realizing that this was exactly what Agnes had once emitted. Staring at the time, he mentally could not believe that this was so, having come to his senses and already running up to the source. Quickly getting up, he stood in surprise opposite the girl and Isaac looking at her. Agnes was focused on the guy's wound, pursing her lip, not understanding what to do until her hair completely turned white, but the wound only bled more. Gilbert simply watched this frozen, especially looking at the image of the girl, not believing his eyes. She didn't even notice his appearance, concentrating on her healing task, trying to gather her magic. The Duke still couldn't believe it, but looking at her silver hair, red eyes, warm light, and the mysterious power of healing made him realize. His mother told the little Duke not to worry, because she would definitely get better. Only very soon they kicked him out the door and said that it was time for his mother's treatment, asking him to take a walk outside for now. The boy's mood quickly dropped, still thinking about his mother and her illness, even while in the beautiful garden. Very soon, a little girl approached him with a bouquet of flowers, awkwardly asking him what had happened. She awkwardly walked closer to him, already examining his face while Gilbert continued to remain silent. The girl continued to ask why he looked so unhappy and why he was sitting here alone. The guy felt slightly awkward looking at her until his gaze softened without noticing it. Clenching his hand into a fist and turning his head away, he said that he was just waiting for his mother, and he was not at all lonely here. Despite this, the girl still sat next to him, holding her flowers, slightly thinking about something. In an instant, she already looked at Gilbert, smiling tenderly, which only made him feel more awkward, and at the same time, comfortable. Feeling some kind of trust, he turned his head away and explained that if he was gloomy, he would interfere with his mother's recovery, because she was constantly suffering, and he only wanted her to feel better as soon as possible. Then the girl took out one flower from her bouquet and told him not to worry, decorating his hair with a flower and saying that she would definitely get better soon. She asked, "Then the guy will no longer be sad, will he?" looking at him tenderly and affectionately. Gilbert was incredibly pleased with her light, staring at her with surprise on his face, remaining silent. Very soon his father called him, which is why, looking in his direction, he conveyed that it was time for him to go. The girl quickly stopped him and asked him to keep their meeting a secret, slightly embarrassedly conveying that it would be their secret. To convince the guy, she said that otherwise she would be in trouble, to which Gilbert was slightly puzzled but agreed. To his surprise, his mother, who was suffering from an incurable disease, suddenly recovered that day, delighting her loved ones. The girl seemed to know this, conveying that her mother has miraculous healing powers. The guy himself smiled awkwardly, watching her run through the field of flowers, glowing because he knew that the girl would feel better. Then he remembered that they had never introduced themselves to each other, bowing slightly and saying that his name was Gilbert, but it could also just be Gil. Having already asked the girl's name, she apologized, slightly upset, saying that she could not tell him her name. She explained this by saying that she also has the same power as her mother, so she will no longer make new acquaintances until she takes control of it. The girl explained that Gilbert looked so lonely that she could not help but approach him. She gently asked him not to make such a face, which is why the guy's face only lit up more with joy and slight surprise. The same one only glowed more with joy, surrounding everything with a bright light, conveying that she was very glad that Gilbert could smile again. The guy was only more confused and fascinated, staring at the girl in surprise. Taking her hand, he asked if he could come to her again, hearing immediate consent, but only so that it was their secret. From that day on, they became friends, often spending time together in secret, meeting through windows. The guy approached her room, and so they looked at each other and waved their hands. Together they ran out into the meadow of flowers, joyfully spending their days together, only secretly from everyone. Gilbert once asked the girl if she had never been to the city, holding a flower in her hand. Sitting on a log, weaving a wreath, she admitted that she had never, but she would really like to go there. Only her mother told her that it was very dangerous outside, slightly tucking the flowers under her, feeling sad. Gilbert enthusiastically said that he could take her away, thereby surprising the girl a little. Putting his hand to his chest, he confidently told her not to worry, because no matter what happened, he promised to protect her. The girl was immediately filled with confidence, asking if what he was saying was true. Then Gilbert said that this is the pure truth, and he promises to defend it not only in the city but everywhere. With such words, he greatly embarrassed the girl, fixing her gaze on him, gaining trust. Dropping to one knee, Gilbert held his hand on his chest and kept promising that he would protect her. Slightly embarrassed, he conveyed that he wanted to always stay close, wanting to be together, even when they grow up. The girl beamed more and more with joy, looking at the guy who extended his little finger to her to seal the oath. Smiling, she immediately took him as hers, saying that she also wanted to stay close to him, only pleasing the boy more. Their shadows ran along the surface of the river, while Gilbert remembered that day he took her to the city. Little, He did not yet know that this would be their last meeting, cheerfully joking with the girl while sitting on the carriage. Arriving in the city, she was immediately interested in everything with its bright appearance and beauty, looking around hungrily with her eyes. Gilbert recalled that they arrived at the height of the festival, so there were more people than usual, and all sorts of entertainment was around. The couple happily stopped everywhere, looking at various things that caused unique delight in the girl. They stopped at the puppet theater next to other children, laughing and looking at all sorts of performances. Soon the girl thanked Gilbert for bringing her here because she did not think that she would have so much fun in the city, thereby embarrassing him. Immediately offering to continue his hike, the boy noticed that she did not answer him, suddenly disappearing somewhere and looking back. He noticed how she, among the crowd, began to walk somewhere straight, as if under someone's call. The boy immediately began to push away the crowd, shouting to them that it was very dangerous to undress, wanting to reach out and call to him. Only the girl did not react, her eyes still looking for someone in the crowd, while Gilbert tried to reach her in the noise. A mysterious man in a hood called the girl, asking her to come to him, saying that he was looking for her. Looking at the stranger, her eyes instantly filled with fear as she stared at him. He stretched out his hand from the crowd towards her, smiling slyly and wanting to grab it. Gilbert also saw this, shouting something so that the girl would pay attention to it, coming out of shock. However, the man with a sharp movement grabbed her hand, squeezing it lightly so that she would not escape, saying that he had finally found her. Coming to her senses, the girl stared at him while the stranger mused that she had silver hair and red eyes, thinking that this was definitely the daughter of the girl he was thinking about. She finally began to resist, asking who he was, demanding to immediately let her go, because they did not know each other. Gilbert soon ran up, knocking the girl's hand out of the man's hand, grabbing it in his own. He immediately ran forward and said that he needed to run, asking her not to turn around at this time. A stranger also tried to get through the crowd, but there were too many people to squeeze through. The couple, without letting go of their hands, ran away to a quiet place without people, standing behind the boxes and gasping for breath. They admitted that they had already broken away. Having relaxed a little, Gilbert immediately suggested that they go home. He would see the girl off. She happily agreed, relaxing from the run herself, thanking him in advance. Her strength returned quickly, which is why, already coming forward, she guiltily admitted that she should not have let go of the guy's hand. Offering to no longer leave each other, a horse suddenly jumped out from around the bend, which the girl had not noticed. However, Gilbert noticed the animal, immediately protecting her, pushing her in a safe direction, getting hit by the hooves himself. His eyes faintly saw how the girl, who had fallen to her knees, looked at him worriedly. A man on a horse shouted after them, insulting them to watch where they were going. Lying on the asphalt with wounds, Gilbert mentally realized that he could not move, trying to remember what happened, wondering if the girl was okay. She, crying, bent over in front of him, shouting an apology that she was very sorry for what happened, blaming herself. Only Gilbert did not agree, saying that it was he who took her out of the house because he wanted to see her smile, while he mentally asked himself if he was really going to die like that. The girl grabbed his hand and said that she would not let him die because she had the same power as her mother. She told him that she would save him no matter what, causing Gilbert to feel a warm feeling in his body as he looked at her. She held his hand in hers, placing it on her lips, while the guy realized how beautiful she was. He just woke up alone, lying on the ground and shaking himself off, trying to remember something. He was also surprised by the absence of wounds, but he was immediately interested in where the girl was. Immediately, bad memories with a stranger came to mind, hoping that this did not happen. He could not remain idle, so he rushed around the city in search of the girl, running around every corner and examining every crowd of people. Later in the evening, making a stop and realizing that she was nowhere to be found, he thought that she probably just went home first. Only when Gilbert came to make sure everything was okay with the girl, her house was engulfed in fire. He stood opposite him, staring and scared, not imagining what could have happened at that moment. When the fire ended, 2 corpses were found in the ashes, which did not calm the guy down, even with family support. No one knew where the girl had gone, so he continued the search, not losing hope and believing his memories. So until he became an adult, he believed that that same girl would be alive, making no mistake at all. Tired Agnes, starting to fall, made sure that the guy's wound was healed and now he was safe. Her light gradually disappeared, as did the color of her hair and eyes, realizing that now everything was in order and everything had worked. Immediately, her body lost strength, lowering Isaac to the ground, herself unconsciously falling forward. Only by passing out did Gilbert prevent her fall by grabbing her in his arms. He looked at her tenderly, saying that he had been looking for her all this time, Agnes. He placed her more comfortably in his arms, as if he couldn't believe his luck that he was now in his arms. The girl was unconscious, but he still directed her face towards him with his hand, looking at her lovingly. He remembered that no matter what anyone said, he never forgot her, while others condemned him for not being able to let go of the past. Others blamed him reproachfully that others were not good enough for him, although for the sake of his family he should get married as soon as possible. Approaching Agnes's face, he said that he had sworn an oath to protect her, and she had suffered for so long because of his selfish desires, feeling guilty. However, he was also grateful to the girl that despite everything that had happened, she continued to live, and he finally found her. After a while, Isaac regained consciousness, standing fresh and clean on the balcony of the estate. He woke up in the medical office, not even knowing what happened. In the ward, he was still coming to his senses and trying to remember. Feeling his back where the wound was, the guy was surprised to admit that somehow his wounds had healed. Awkwardly, he told Agnes that her power was real, and his body was living proof of this, smiling awkwardly. Only the plan was to wound the girl herself in order to test her healing magic. Chuckling, Isaac realized that he had rushed to protect her without thinking, knowing that someone would be angry when they found out. However, the bloody cough did not leave him anywhere, leaving pain inside, regretting that it did not heal him from the disease. For a moment it even seemed to him that this was impossible, when a man approached him from behind and called him by name. Ubel asked the guy how to implement his plan to make sure of the girl's abilities and kidnap her. Without turning to the master, Isaac understood that he could not allow him to find out what really happened. Turning around sharply, he said that the assassin had escaped right before the attack, although before that, everything had gone smoothly between them. Yawning, he conveyed that he should return home and think of a new strategy on how to get her to show her magic. Isaac said that he himself would like to look at the miraculous power of Agnes, leaving and saying that he would go already. Only Ubel slyly noticed that there was blood on the guy's shoulder, making him tense and think. Smiling slyly, the man held him on his shoulder and asked if he was sure that Agnes did not use her power, looking askance. Squeezing him even tighter, Ubel, smiling more, repeated where the blood on his shoulder came from. Isaac understood that if he told him the truth, Agnes would be in danger, once again under pressure from her master. Moving away from the man, he mentally understood that everything was in order, because this was what was planned from the very beginning for the girl. He just needed to implement it. Just starting to speak, the guy's thoughts came to a memory where Agnes called him her friend, which made her happy, but now made him stop. Turning to Ubel, he himself asked what he wanted to say about the girl when he started speaking. Isaac, getting out of it, asked if he himself really didn't understand anything, making the smile disappear from the man's face. Adjusting his jacket, he explained that he had an attack right in front of Agnes, and this blood, which he coughed up, hoping to hide the traces, was wiped from his hand on his shirt. Only the girl noticed and was very worried about him, which made Ubel think, asking if she was really just worried. Waving his hand, Isaac confirmed that he was only worried. He was not able to make sure to see her power in action. Then the man noticed that since Agnes had left, there was no reason to stay here anymore, heading towards the exit, which surprised the guy. Having asked if he had really left, Ubel said that Carla had been bitten by a pet rat, so she was in a bad mood. Adding that he had to console her. On the street, the lady shouted at the servants that she was leaving here immediately and demanding that her father be here. Waving his hand, Isaac, agreeing, also thought that it was time for him to go when he immediately stopped. Among the columns, he noticed the figure of the very man who had wounded him while attacking Agnes. He came out and pointed his finger at the guy and said that there could be no mistake here, because he was sure that he had stabbed him with a knife. Slightly frightened and trembling, he asked if the girl had really healed him, and before his eyes was that same incredible power. While the killer continued that she was the same holy savior from the legend, Isaac's face darkened, realizing that he had witnesses. Grabbing the guy by the shoulder, the stranger began to ask what he said to Mr. Wilfried and why he was silent now, shaking him a little. Telling him to forget, the guy threatened to tell the man the truth himself, when a syringe stuck into his neck and the contents quickly ended up in it. Taking out a needle, Isaac said that he could not let the killer escape with this information. A moment later, he collapsed dead on the sidewalk, while the guy realized that he was also an idiot, having crossed a dangerous line, hiding the syringe back in his jacket. Clutching his head, he told Agnes out loud as he left that she should consider this as payment for his salvation. Looking at the sky, the guy even wondered if they could see each other again. Thoughts of Agnes clearly made him happy, but at the same time embarrassed him, keeping his hands on his neck and realizing that she had given him a new life. A few hours later at the estate of Duke Dedrix, the girl was just regaining consciousness, opening her eyes and trying to understand where she was. Gilbert sat nearby, telling her that he had brought her home after a dinner party. Excitingly, he added that she and Isaac Hagen were unconscious on the terrace, clearly worried about it. Then Agnes herself remembered what happened on the street, awkwardly realizing that her magic had worked. Rising from his seat, the Duke said that she was probably very tired, wanting to leave her to rest now. Only then the girl called him, saying that she had something that she was hiding from him, asking him to listen to her now. She admitted that someone had attacked her and Isaac, awkwardly kneading their hands, squeezing the hem of their clothes down. Gilbert listened slightly tensely as she added that the guy was injured while defending her. Smoothly lowering her head, Agnes added that, unfortunately, the attacker managed to escape. With anger towards himself, clenching his fists, the guy said that he should not have agreed. He should have stayed next to the girl, only she immediately got up and insisted that it was not his fault, because she told the Duke not to go with her. Turning to the window, Agnes, lowering her head, said that she would tell him something now, and this would certainly make him think that she was inventing some strange tale for herself. Only Gilbert was completely attentive. The girl walked up to the window, opening it to let the moonlight enter the room, turning to the guy and saying that she had mysterious healing powers. The guy listened to her carefully, staring without any specific emotion. Agnes continued that she wanted to talk to Isaac, because he said that he had information about this by looking at his hands. Closing her eyes, she nevertheless said an apology for not telling the Duke about this earlier, because she promised her mother to keep it a secret. Moreover, she herself did not understand and did not know about her strength, to which Gilbert rose from his seat, calmly understanding why she was silent. Slightly hesitantly, Agnes added that she was still afraid to say something about it because she thought that the guy would find her creepy. Clenching her hands and keeping her head down, she admitted that she ended up simply running towards danger. Tears appeared in her eyes, saying that she was very sorry for causing him so much trouble. Gilbert was immediately next to her, gently touching her shoulder, distracting her from bad thoughts. He directly asked why he had to think she was creepy, looking softly and tenderly. Agnes gently took his hand from her shoulder, pressing it to her cheek, feeling the pleasant warmth from the presence of the guy nearby. Slightly embarrassed by this, Gilbert immediately hugged the girl, pressing her to him, which surprised her, making her blush. Closing his eyes, red, the guy admitted that he was jealous of Hagen because he didn't want to see how they were getting closer. That is why he tried to push Agnes away from him while she listened to him attentively. Gilbert hugged her tighter, saying that he promised to protect her with all his might, to which she herself hugged the guy, snuggling. She called out shyly, leaning comfortably into his shoulder, feeling great, albeit a little embarrassed. After hugging for a while, the guy finally decided to ask why the girl was so angry with him at the ball. Awkwardly remembering that moment, Agnes said that then the Duke told her something that upset her very much. Gilbert was caught by the word that he said something that upset her, as if asking again how this was possible. Hanging her head, she understood that at some point they would have to say goodbye, sadly realizing this. However, Agnes immediately added that until then, she wants to stay close to him, and this is her desire, gently holding the guy in her arms. He also stared at her, slightly embarrassed but happy, not hiding his smile. The girl only added that she was happy to see his smile, while he remembered that he had already heard these words from little Agnes. With a bigger smile, he realized that it was she, remembering that he had promised to protect her, no matter what, and stay by her side. Gently holding her hand, Gilbert also admitted that he should also tell her something, because she had lost her parents and memories after going through so many hardships. Darkened by thoughts, he awkwardly said that it all happened because of him in childhood. Agnes stared at him, slightly frightened, when he began to list what had happened to her. She was especially frightened by the gloomy look from the Duke when he admitted that it all happened because of him. She instantly removed her hands from his palm, causing Gilbert to tense up, but he understood that such a reaction could happen, which is why he only sighed. Only to his surprise, Agnes clasped his palm with both hands, looking straight into his eyes, asking him not to hide anything from her. She promised to accept everything he said, looking at him tenderly and affectionately, asking him to tell him. Slightly hesitantly, the Duke said that the bride he had been looking for all this time was her, which greatly surprised the girl. As a child, Gilbert remembered the image of a little girl who said that his mother would soon get better, and he knew that this was unlikely. While stroking his friend's horse, he recalled that all the doctors said that his mother's illness was incurable. Suddenly, a familiar and gentle voice called him by name, causing his eyes to immediately fill with happiness. Looking in the direction of the voice, he could not believe his ears and eyes that his mother was in the garden in a stroller with his father, and she was calling him. Concerned, Gilbert asked if she shouldn't rest, immediately stopping her from moving on. Luckily for him, his mother replied that she was not in pain today, so they went outside. The boy's father also noticed that this amazing power really exists, and he is very glad that they turned to it. Gilbert himself was pleased with their smiles and joy, staring at his parents and smiling widely. Very soon they all left for the city together, joyfully greeting everyone who came. The boy himself was happy, mentally not believing that his mother could go to the city again. Here, the father distracted Gilbert, said that the adults had something to talk about, asking him to take a walk somewhere for a while and wait for them. Having kissed his mother, he told her that he would be in the square, receiving her smile and warning. Coming out to the square, he noticed how many people had gathered near the church, thinking that it was time for the service. Walking through the crowd, Gilbert himself thought that he could pray for his mother's health. Slightly awkwardly, he ran into a hooded man who was holding a painting in his hand while the guy cursorily apologized. The man immediately began to reassure that it was his fault, while the fabric from the picture smoothly fell, revealing a portrait of a girl with white hair and red eyes. She caught Gilbert's attention, thinking she was familiar to her, and she was right. The man himself saw that the guy knew her, grabbing her by the shoulder and starting to shout and ask if he really knew who she was. Hesitating, remembering the words of his new acquaintance, he replied that he did not know, but the stranger immediately fell to his knees, asking her to tell him. The man explained that his daughter had an incurable disease, and she did not have long to live, so all he could do was hope for a miracle. Gilbert was already embarrassed to lie because the stranger had a person close to him who was also sick, just like him. Standing awkwardly in front of the man, the guy said that in the forest outside the city there is a doctor's estate. His mother was told that she was incurable, but now she is healthy. Without looking at the man, he told him to turn there and passed by on his way to church. The stranger greedily thanked him, looking askance and angrily in his direction. That day, the fire broke out, when everyone was already standing on the ruins of the house and discussing who could have done it. His father spoke to the butler that the family must have been attacked by someone who wanted their power, but their presence here was a secret. Crying, Gilbert heard that they realized that someone had told ill-wishers about this place. Realizing that it was him, telling this, again blaming himself, the guy shed tears, feeling strong guilt before the girl. Agnes looked at him slightly surprised, but with interest, because it was very important for her to learn about her past, any past. Gilbert, hanging his head guiltily, apologized that her parents were gone through his fault, tenderly holding her hands. Unexpectedly for him, the girl said that she would not forgive him for this, so, slightly tense, he gathered his strength, trying not to cry. Hanging her head lower, Agnes asked if she should really react like that, should she blame him, that it was all his fault. She immediately looked up at him, reassuring him that he had been going through this alone for so long. Realizing that the truth suffered a lot, she did not deny it, however. She noticed that after meeting him, life was finally filled with colors. Gilbert felt some embarrassment for her kindness, wanting to say something, but he hadn't gotten around to it yet. Agnes continued that she remembered a boy who often played with her, and they promised to stay together forever. The guy knew what it was about, slightly embarrassed hearing about it, realizing that he was right. The girl herself, stretching her hands to the Duke's face, admitted that she did not remember the face of that boy, but finally saw the face of the past in his, believing that all this time it was them. Gilbert himself admitted that he had been looking for her for so long, hoping that she had survived, and never stopped believing that she was alive to this day. He never for a moment forgot about the girl, who turned out to be Agnes, because he wanted to meet and apologize to her. Shaking her head, the girl immediately said that the one who took advantage of the little Duke's kindness was to blame. More relaxed, he called out to her, slightly gathering his thoughts as he stared at her. Gilbert asked her if he could forgive her. Would she stay by his side forever? Agnes was only happier with the proposal, saying that she wanted to be happy next to the Duke, extending her little finger. Smiling slightly embarrassed, he said that he was very glad, taking her little finger with his. Smoothly releasing his finger, Gilbert looked at her happily, calling her to look at him. Staring at him, the guy suddenly pulled her towards him, which greatly surprised the girl. He pressed her hand with his, bringing her closer to his chest, while he himself leaned low towards her, which only embarrassed her more. Immediately, he changed his mind, froze, feeling slightly awkward, looking at the embarrassed girl. Agnes did not understand at all what was happening, looking at the Duke in response, still calling him Mr. Gilbert. Letting go of her hand, turning away, the guy apologized and asked her to forget what just happened. He turned to leave, saying that he was glad to talk with her today, leaving only bewilderment with his behavior. Wishing her a good rest and good night, he immediately left the room, closing the door behind him. Agnes stared at this door in surprise, awkwardly wishing good night in response, a little surprised. However, she still felt the warmth of the moment, blushing a little as she imagined it again. Gilbert only closed the door and was in no hurry to leave, standing under it and thinking a little. Having just replayed the moment in his head, he covered his mouth and asked himself what he was even going to do. Malin immediately beamed with joy and told the lady that the Duke wanted to kiss her, that's for sure. They were on the terrace when the girl, enjoying tea, listened to the maid's admiration for the kiss. Staring at her, she awkwardly asked why Gilbert would want this. With a satisfied smile, Malin said that this was love, the beginning of love between her and the Duke. Staring thoughtfully at her, Agnes tried to comprehend the words about love, as if not believing, blushing slightly. The guy immediately came to her, asking if she wanted to take a walk with him. Slightly excitedly, she realized that Gilbert was here, to which he asked if he really scared her. Hearing that Agnes would immediately go get ready, he smiled and told her that he would be waiting for her with Zig. Looking tenderly at the guy, she awkwardly said okay, as if staring in love. The Duke himself noticed this look, blushing slightly, but looked at her in response, soon leaving to wait for her. Lowering her eyes into her mug, Agnes awkwardly tried to understand what was wrong with her, and where such awkwardness came from. A happy Malin stood nearby. Why did she think that it was all because of her words, because now she can't even look a guy in the face normally? Rising from her seat, she thanked the maid for the food as she wished her a good walk. Smiling tenderly at her, Agnes thanked her again, saying that they would see each other later. Very soon she went to Gilbert, who was waiting for her with his friend Zig, tenderly holding her hand. Mailing watched from the window as the other maids approached her from behind, asking if the two had left together, applying that they were getting along so well lately. Another girl noticed that they began to talk to each other more often before going to bed. The second one remembered that the Duke's gaze at Lady Agnes became so soft and gentle, remembering that she had recently seen them in front of her. The first honestly admitted that she was very worried when they did not communicate with each other for some time. Malin herself, smiling, agreed that she was very glad that the couple had made peace and were now getting along so well. The butler also got into the conversation of the maids without warning or greeting, telling them that the one had been found. Only the girls immediately tensed up, explaining to Klaus that they weren't messing around. Tense up. The man announced to them that Lady Agnes was the girl that young Mr. Gilbert had been looking for all this time. Here the maid stared at him, slightly surprised, realizing his words and being delighted. The butler explained that there were times when he very strongly recommended that the Duke settle down, then countless brides came to the estate. Only the master did not need any of them, which is why everyone feared him as a murderous Duke. Lowering his head, Klaus came to the conclusion that all this time the guy was waiting only for Lady Agnes. This explained their relationship more, imagining them in the role of the future Duchess. The slightly embarrassed maids could not believe, embarrassed and joyful, that Lady Agnes was the one. Malin continued for them, noticing that the same bride was beaming with joy and just as delighted with this information. Gilbert, being with the girl in a meadow of flowers, immediately apologized for taking her out for a walk so suddenly. He awkwardly admitted that the stares of the servants were too stressful for him, now exhaling calmly. Grinning, the girl herself knew about this, awkwardly agreeing that it was so, and it seemed to her the same way. She looked at him and admitted that she was happy to spend time with the Duke, smiling. Gilbert himself said that he was very happy about this, awkwardly reaching out with his hand towards her, only then stopping. Turning away, he mentally admitted to himself that lately he had been unconsciously tempted to touch Agnes, but she still had not fully recovered her memories. Immediately, a girl awkwardly interrupted his thoughts, asking if she could ask him for some favor, to which he immediately agreed. Agnes said confidently that there was one place where she would really like to go and find out something. A few days later, at the Wilfred family estate, Carla scolded the maids, calling them useless, throwing a mug. One of the maids barely dodged the blow, apologizing to the lady while the other checked on her, calming her down. Pursing her lips, biting, Carla was incredibly angry. Mentally remembering that evening, because after it everything went downhill, mentally asking why she was so humiliated, why Agnes smiled so happily when she was supposed to die. Promising that he would never forgive these two, the father came to the noise, calling Carla and distracting her from her thoughts. He noticed that she was in a bad mood, while the lady was screaming that girl made her feel such shame at the ball. Gently stroking his daughter's head, Ubel said that she had already told him about this many times, noting that she had suffered so much, the poor thing. Collecting tears in her eyes, Carla said that she would never forgive this vile duke and his happy dirty rat. She immediately became curious, asking if they could use her father's power to do something to them, only to receive a cold response that they would look into it later. Turning around and leaving the lady, Ubel said that he was busy now because guests were waiting for him, offering to talk later, while Carla froze a little. Looking after her father, she could not understand who the guests were, becoming slightly gloomy from this. The doors opened and the man entered the room, immediately apologizing for keeping them waiting for him. He said that he was pleased to see Agnes in good health, while the girl stared at him slightly incredulously as she sat next to the Duke. A few hours earlier, the couple had just gotten ready to leave when Gilbert asked if she was sure it was worth going. He also asked if that place wasn't full of bad memories for her, which made Agnes think a little. Only she was confident in her decision, conveying that she had to find out the whole truth, otherwise she would not be able to live in peace. The girl was sure that the gentleman, that is her uncle, must know something about the death of her parents. Gilbert was slightly worried, but agreed with her as to why they drove on to Wilfred's estate. Arriving at the place, the butler immediately thanked Duke Dedrix for his patience, bowing slightly. They entered the estate together, and all the butlers bowed silently as they saw the couple off. Only in the crowd of maids there were whispers, realizing that Agnes was next to the Duke, not quite understanding why she was alive, because she had to repay them with her death. They continued to call her a doll without a conscience, also noticing that she had become more like an evil demon, which is why the girl seemed tense hearing all this. Immediately, Gilbert leaned over her shoulder, asking if she was all right now, thereby slightly frightening her. Saying that everything was fine because she knew that they would react this way, she put her finger to her lips and asked him to behave as they had discussed earlier, to which the Duke only cast a sidelong glance at the maids. Turning away from them, looking straight ahead, he said that he would do this, feeling at the same time some awkwardness. They were given a hall, where they were asked to wait temporarily until Mr. Wilfred, having freed himself, came to them, where they immediately settled down at the table. While they waited, Gilbert smiled silently, exchanging glances with the girl, trying to make sure she was okay. Soon a maid came to them, bringing a mug of tea on a tray, telling them that it was ready. Agnes immediately recognized the woman as the head maid, now feeling awkward in front of her. She in turn put one mug of tea on the table, moving it closer to the Duke. This also angered Gilbert, who raised his eyes to the servants, asking why she brought only one cup. Gloomily, the woman replied that she considered it in vain to brew tea for someone who could not taste it. The Duke immediately became gloomy at such words, while Agnes, taking his hand so that he would not lose his temper, sniffed the aroma. She remarked, saying that the tea had a pleasant smell, asking if it was Lafleur's tea. The maid was very surprised that the girl said such a thing. Gilbert also felt awkward while the girl smiled slyly. The woman was very surprised that such an uncouth doll like Agnes could distinguish the scent, thinking that she simply managed to guess with the help of her superficial knowledge. Exhaling, the Duke more calmly asked her if her master had returned yet. However, she held the tray in her hands and lowered her head and remained silent, scrunching her face in anger. Then, slightly daring her, Agnes asked again when he would be, when the maid shouted at her that her master was not here. The girl was slightly surprised by this answer, asking what the woman meant. She answered with impudence that they could wait, but she did not say that she would tell the gentleman about their arrival. Agnes noticed that they had sent him a letter and agreed to meet in advance, feeling slightly awkward. Immediately the headmaid shouted to the girl that a brat like her should know her place, and the master would not waste his time on her. Hanging over her, the woman said that no matter how long she waited, the gentleman would not come, so they could just leave. Gilbert did not tolerate this, wanting to get up from his seat, shouting that he would not just listen to such an attitude while she stopped him. The maid mentally believed that she had won, because Agnes would obviously now cry to the Duke like a pathetic doll. Immediately the lady's gaze changed to a more stern one, acutely noticing that it seemed that the woman herself did not know her place. Such words twitched her greatly, asking her what she was saying, a little scared. Agnes sharply noticed that the maid makes her master's guests wait, insulting them, and all this without his approval. Staring gloomily at her, Agnes noticed that with such behavior, she was sullying the name of the Wilfred family. This look made the maid twitch in fear, staring at her in horror. Therefore, the girl, rising from her seat, ordered her to convey her message to her master, Ubel Wilfred. She wanted the headmaid to say that she, Agnes, had arrived and was waiting for him to discuss. Cringing with fear and horror, the woman stuttered and walked away with her back to the exit, saying that she understood everything and would tell it right away. Under the girl's sidelong glance, she quickly left the hall, feeling the pressure from her words. As soon as she left, Gilbert immediately apologized for losing his temper a little because she told him to remain silent, which seemed to him a very cruel request in such a situation. Agnes smiled widely and explained that she just wanted to take a little revenge on the old woman. In his office, Ubel read the letter, mentally remembering how suspicious Isaac behaved at the ball, and then he received this letter from Agnes, which made him feel like something had definitely happened there. He looked back at the portrait, which was well hung, saying that the girl probably wanted to seal it properly, but he would ruin her plans. Immediately came the memory of how the same girl from the portrait screamed, asking if he really wanted to use not only her, but also her daughter. Clenching her fist in her hand, she looked at him, threatening that she would not allow him to do whatever he wanted with Agnes. Ubel angrily realized that there was nothing more annoying than a puppet with free will clinging to a portrait with its nails and tearing it. He wanted to awaken the power of Agnes and become a god who would be worshipped by everyone without exception. His evil thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of the butler and the senior maid, asking them if the girl had really arrived. The woman said that she clearly wanted to demand something from him, thinking the same way that the Duke might not be real, admitting that she hesitated whether to bother him about this. With a deceitful smile, the man said that he understood her because she was clearly thinking about this family. The maid was pleased with this understanding from the master, lighting up with joy and pride. Only then did the smile disappear from her face, as did Ubel, who knocked her off her feet with a sharp blow. He said menacingly that he himself responded to Agnes's letter and invited them here, and she took and discredited his name. When leaving, the gentleman wished her to get out of his sight because she would never set foot in this house again. Tears appeared on the maid's face as she wiped away the pain from the master's strong blow, being in slight shock from what was happening. Ubel told the butler to deal with her immediately while leaving for the meeting. At the door, the man immediately met Duke Diedrichs, conveying his joy from this acquaintance. Slightly deceitfully, Gilbert also conveyed that he was very glad to meet him, Count Wilfred. Then he turned to Agnes, remembering that they had recently been at the same ball, asking the girl if she was present there. Rubbing his forehead, he immediately apologized for his daughter Carla for causing them so much trouble, saying that he had already scolded her. Then there was a moment of silence. Agnes immediately said that they came here because she needed to ask him something. She conveyed that she was interested in the death of her parents, that is, his younger brother and his wife. Ubel listened, answering only clearly, becoming slightly visibly gloomy on this topic, thinking for a minute. His face twisted into a sly smile, saying that it was finally time to talk about them with the girl. Frowning slightly as he looked at her, Ubel promised to tell her the whole truth that he knew. Taking her hand, the man began to say that his brother, Adele, and her mother Lily were very important to him. He smiled at her, saying that he had been actively looking for her parents for a long time because he treasured them. This slightly puzzled Agnes, not understanding why he needed to look for them, looking at him in surprise. Ubel then invited her to continue the conversation at the table, pointing to their places before his arrival. All three of them silently sat down at the round table, only exchanging silent glances. A man broke the silence, saying that one day the girl's parents suddenly disappeared. He remembered their silhouettes going somewhere into the distance, smoothly blurring and disappearing while he only repeated that he was looking for. Only when he finally discovered their house, they were already dead, burned out. Hanging his head, he regretfully conveyed that if he had managed to find them earlier, he would have been able to help them, regretting this to this day. However, Agnes's gaze only became more tense because her mother and father were afraid that someone would find their whereabouts. Even when she was little, she was not allowed to leave the walls of the estate, leaving her with the servants in case of emergency. Ubel added that he was also sad that they had come such a way, and he could not even share useful information with them. Then the girl began her reasoning out loud that he told her about the death of her parents before she left the mansion, that for the sake of her protection, he left her as a servant. Her gaze was more stern, noting that if he really didn't know anything, he wouldn't say something like that, asking her to tell her what he was hiding. Such insight clearly angered the Count, who stared at her slightly askance, realizing that she was beginning to guess. Rising from his seat, leaning on the table, the man noticed that Agnes was really a smart girl, which slightly surprised her. Starting to walk from his place, he explained that if he delved into the details of her parents' life, he would have to tell about things that were extremely difficult to believe. Agnes only more confidently confirmed that she was ready to listen, no matter what. Removing his hands from his face, Ubel was amused by such confidence, turning it into a smile. He said that her mother, Lily, had some mysterious power that could heal. Then Agnes asked if it was really mysterious, mentally understanding what he meant. Suddenly, Ubel reached out to her, saying that he actually wanted to ask her about this. Grabbing her hand, the man asked if she knew anything about Lily's power, mentally wondering what her answer would be. The girl stared at him slightly frightened, tensed, and tried to free her hand, saying that she knew nothing. This answer aroused the Count's rage, asking if this was true because she should know, since she was her daughter, how Gilbert had already squeezed his hand. Freeing Agnes's hand, he called him, as if reminding him of his presence here. With some pain and anger, Ubel let go of the girl as she rubbed the pain away. Moving away from her, he apologized to them, making excuses that he was simply worried. As Gilbert leaned over to see how she was feeling, the man called out to her, causing both of them to look up at him. Opening his arms, the man invites her to return home to them, apologizing that they treated her horribly, even though it was for her protection. The Duke became very tense at this proposal, staring unkindly at the Count, listening to his speech. The same one, looking at Agnes, offered to officially recognize her as his daughter, which is why she herself felt distrust. Ubel, pressing his hands to his chest, thus offered to give her what he could not give to his brother. Agnes thanked him, calling him uncle, but also refusing because she is now married, looking at Gilbert, thereby confusing him. The man just nodded at this, smiling and remaining silent, not knowing what to add. Turning away from them, leaving for the exit, offering in this case to allow him at least this evening to show her the greatest hospitality. The Duke tried to refuse, but Ubel offered to atone for his guilt, because it was hard for him to think that he could not do anything for his precious daughter. Then the servants showed the couple to their rooms, where no one dared to discuss Agnes anymore. Remaining in the office, Ubel angrily realized that the girl's memory was clearly returning. There was no mistake, hoping that she would soon show her strength. The girl and Gilbert were in the same room when she realized that she would eventually have to stay here for the night. Noticing her tension, the Duke immediately said that if it was difficult for her to be in this house, they could leave, even if he had to use force. Then Agnes awkwardly refused because the estate may have some information about her parents. After looking out the window with her, Gilbert asked if everything was all right, very worried about her. The girl looked at him, smiling brightly, and noticing that this was so because he was next to her. The Duke said that he would stay in the room with her because he did not want her to be attacked again if she was left alone. Blushing slightly at such an offer, she did not refuse, only immediately thanking him. It was only later that embarrassing thoughts that they would spend the night together and alone came to Agnes, causing her to blush even more. The guy also noticed that for some reason the girl blushed, clutching her cheeks. Then it also dawned on him how his proposal might sound a little strange, immediately adding that he was simply acting as her guard. He suggested that if she wanted, he could go to another room, which Agnes immediately refused. Looking at each other, she said, slightly red, that she did not mind his company at all, because she felt calmer when he was next to her. Gilbert, although embarrassed, was glad of this, looking tenderly at the girl, and also agreed to stay. Agnes stared at him in the same way, just as happy at the thought that she would be safe next to him. Only the look did not last long, and they turned red from each other, remaining with their thoughts. Later in the evening, Ubal met the couple, sipping from a glass of wine as they sat across from him. The man was especially smiling and happy, happily drinking and smiling at the couple. The Duke and Agnes were slightly perplexed by this behavior, looking at him. Finally, they were left alone in the room, reading a book, spending time comfortably. They looked into each other's eyes with special tenderness, somehow feeling the time they spent together in a new way. Gilbert was the first to rise, noting that it was time for them to go to bed, with which the girl no doubt agreed, because they needed a good rest. Suddenly, the guy called out to Agnes, touching her palm while she looked at it, slightly embarrassed, not understanding. The Duke instantly pulled her towards him, pressing her lightly, while his gaze became more intense. She only blushed more. Not quite understanding what was happening, Gilbert had already leaned down and quietly explained to her that someone was coming. Because of this, he immediately hid in the curtains with Agnes on his arm, looking only towards the door, waiting for strangers. While he only pressed her closer to him, the girl awkwardly realized, blushing, that they were standing too close. The steps gradually died down, but then the door creaked, causing her a little horror, while the guy lurked and listened and peeked. Having closed the door, a silhouette in a dark hood stood opposite it, facing the couple, making them unable to understand who it was. The stranger immediately began to look around, noticing that there was no one in the room. All the furniture was left untouched and the lights were turned off. Thinking that they could be hiding in the closet, he immediately opened it and began rummaging through it, while Agnes and Gilbert looked out from behind the curtain, wanting to understand who it was. Noticing the curtains nearby, the hooded man didn't have time to move it aside when the Duke grabbed his hand, squeezing it lightly. Looking at the man who arrived, the girl realized with horror that it was Lady Carla, while she stared at them in hatred. Not believing her eyes, Agnes asked her what she was doing here, staring in surprise. The girl, with a sharp movement, freed her hand, shouting that she would never forgive her, Agnes, for breaking into this house. Looking out from behind the Duke, she sincerely did not understand what Carla was talking about, asking again what she was talking about. The lady felt insanely angry, shouting at her not to play dumb. She saw Agnes kick out the headmaid because she told everyone what kind of person she really was. Carla was also annoyed that she was now trying to appropriate her own father. She clenched her fists, shouting that she had noticed all this, until Agnes no longer understood what she was talking about, because she had come to ask the Count about her parents. Wishing her to shut up, Carla said that she had known about her terrible nature since childhood. After all, she believed that the girl always behaved pitifully in order to attract the attention of her father. She saw and thought that she was trying to take her family away from her, since she was approaching her father with her pity. Carla thought that she would finally find happiness when Agnes was gone, saying everything with more hatred. Only from that evening when the ball took place, her father did not think about anything else but her, remembering how he worried about the girl's letter. Taking out the sword, Carla said that Agnes was a demon who stole her father's love, which belonged to her. Gilbert immediately stepped forward to protect the girl, realizing that the lady could seriously harm her, while she herself was wondering why the lady was so angry with her. Taking a swing, she shouted that if the Duke of Death did not kill her, then she herself would now do it. Gilbert immediately stood in front of her so that Carla would not have time to find an opportunity to somehow injure the girl. Having intercepted her hand with the weapon, in surprise the lady dropped it, hitting the guy's face, which is why there was already scarlet blood on it. Agnes stared at this in horror, calling out to the guy and looking at his wound with concern. Only he was calm, telling Carla to leave this unfounded offense against his fiancée. Twitching again, tearing her hand out of his grip, the lady screamed that she would never forgive her because she was resting on her laurels, thanks to her father's kindness, although she was just a rat who knew no worries. With a gloomy look on her face, Agnes asked if she really had no worries while she was at the estate. The lady herself became tense at her voice, a little surprised that she spoke. Agnes herself came closer to Carla, asking the Duke to let her go with her hand, asking if she even understood any of this. Here Gilbert already felt some awkwardness. Although he had let go of the lady's hand, he still remained tense. Closing her eyes, Agnes said that in this estate she did not feel a moment of peace, also without feeling anything. However, she immediately corrected herself that if she had not shackled her heart and behaved like a weak-willed puppet, she would not have lived a day in this hell that was for her at Wilfred's estate. Immediately, Carla was outraged, asking how she even dared to say such things about her house because they took such good care of her. Agnes continued that it was Mr. Gilbert who brought her back to human life after this place made her a puppet. And now Carla dared to make him bleed. Why now, she shouted that she would not forgive her. From behind her back in a sheath, the lady pulled out a hidden knife, asking if she really wouldn't forgive her. She asked how she dared to behave so arrogantly, swinging a knife at Agnes, running it along her neck. Slightly frightened, Gilbert called the girl, worrying that the lady could hurt her. Only by running the knife along her neck did Agnes convey to her that if she really wanted to hurt her, then let her go ahead. In an instant, bright sparks appeared around her as she said that Carla would waste her time surprising her. The Agnes she knew was no longer standing in front of the lady, while the girl was outwardly returning to her former self. Staring at her in fear, Carla could not believe her eyes that the girl's wound on her neck had healed in an instant. With a sly look and a smile, the girl said that she was a monster, staring straight at her. She looked at Agnes in horror and did not understand what she was seeing before her eyes. Falling to the floor. From such fear and excitement, she could not stand it for a long time and fainted while the couple looked at her. Slightly concerned, Gilbert called out to her, drawing her attention as his wound continued to bleed. Turning to him, Agnes suggested returning home, looking at him with a soft and radiant smile. Coming closer to him, touching his cheek with her hand, which caused the wound to heal quickly, she explained that they would not be able to rest peacefully in this house. Gilbert did not resist at all, which is why they were soon riding in a carriage back to their estate. Agnes uncomfortably realized that she had gone too far, remembering that Lady Mia ran away when she saw her like this, calling her a monster. Thinking of taking advantage of this, she never expected that Carla would be scared out of her mind, laughing lightly. Turning his head away from her, Gilbert said that she was not a monster at all. He also noted that if she heals her own and others' wounds, the pain will still remain, and he does not want to use methods that will make her feel pain. Such words warmed Agnes madly, which is why, looking at the guy, she smiled widely, glowing with joy. Leaning against him, she herself conveyed that she did not want to hurt those she valued. The estate immediately became noisy, to which Ubel arrived and asked if Agnes had really left, while the butler explained that something had happened between her and Lady Carla. The man immediately went to his daughter, asking how the lady herself, in fright and stuttering, tried to say at least something. Clutching the blanket, she screamed with tears in her eyes that this girl Agnes was a monster. In slight shock, Ubel tried to figure out how Carla grabbed her head and said that the color of her hair and eyes had changed. Then her wound healed while her mother tried to calm the girl down, and she whined that it was so scary that she was scared. However, her father's eyes lit up at the thought that Agnes had finally awakened, experiencing insane joy. His gaze also darkened, realizing that most likely someone had betrayed him, remembering one guy. Isaac read some data in the library, realizing that he really treated people terribly. Examining one paper, he also admitted that things seemed very bad because it was written on it to catch Agnes.